around the work that we have been doing. And so before I start, I'm just going to give the apologies. So we've got apologies from Jim Andrews, who's the Chief Operating Officer for Bournemouth University. We've got apologies from Neil Bacon, who's our Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer. Louise Bale from Health Watch. Yes, I thought that's why I was pausing. All right, so you're attending virtually until noon. Thank you very much, Louise. Rhiannon Woods, who's one of our non-executive members of the ICB. Sam Crowe, Director of Public Health. Dawn Harvey, our Chief People Officer, but we've got Emma Shipton here for her. Paul Johnson, Chief Medical Officer. Karen Loftus is not with us, but we've got Emma, who's been with us before, so welcome, Emma. I think we've also got apologies from Dean, haven't we? Because we've got...
No.
Online. Okay.
I'm here.
That's fine. And Matt Prosser, CEO for Dorset Council, and Vicky Slade. Oh, exactly. Vicky Slade, the leader for BCP, but Graham's here. Is Matt online? Oh, apologies, Matt. He doesn't say that. It does say that you're attending until 11:30. So. And then we've got some additional attendees, but we'll get to them as and when they get to their part. So what I'm going to do is to hand to Patricia, do you want to start, or am I going straight to Rob?
No, I'll do the presentation and then Rob can do the accounts.
Obviously, an AGM on finance.
I get to do the happy bit. Yeah, so I'll do you want me to start to the front, or am I okay to present the accounts?
Can you hear online okay? Yeah.
Yes. All right, I'll do it from here then. So, yes, this is our AGM to present the accounts and the report around performance. First of all, for the an element around the clinical commissioning group, because some of you will know that with the new Health and Care Act being introduced on the 1st of July, which brought integrated care boards into as a legal entity, that we still have in the first part of the year the accounts and performance to close down the CCG in its previous form on the 30th of June. So, can we move to the next slide, please? So, in terms of the transition from Dorset Clinical Commissioning to NHS Dorset, a little bit of background for everyone. As I said, the introduction of the Health and Care Act was on the 1st of July in 2022, and that led to the formal closure of clinical commissioning groups and the establishment of integrated care boards. Integrated care boards having a much broader remit and responsibility than clinical commissioning groups. The organisation moved from being a GP-led membership organisation to what we call a unitary board, which is very common in the NHS. It's what we consider to be a healthy board structure. And so what a unitary board does for members of the public who never worked with one before is it brings a level of collective responsibility for board members around the decision making, around strategic direction and the fulfilment of the statutory functions. So unlike in a private sector organisation where you may have the chief executive only at the board meeting and the trustees or non-execs holding that individual to account, in a unitary board we have all the executive around the table as well as the non-executive, because there is collective responsibility around decision making and direction. So a very different format. The Integrated Care Board is, its public name is NHS Dorset, and it's responsible for leading the integrated care system across Dorset on behalf of system partners, as well as being a system partner, which can be quite tricky at times. The system consists of our NHS organisations, which are Dorset County Hospital, Dorset Healthcare, and University Hospitals of Dorset in the east. We also have two higher tier local authorities, which are Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, and Dorset Council. We partner with our voluntary sector very strongly, and we have our primary care organisation, which is the GP Alliance, which our GPs and primary care organisations belong to. So it's and then we have business. So it's quite a broad sector of partners that come together in order to not just lead the development of health services for Dorset, but actually support communities to thrive in terms of their economic and social development. We also, during this year and possibly next year, will be taking on additional responsibility as an organisation in terms of commissioning of primary care services such as ophthalmics, pharmacy and dental, which were previously commissioned on our behalf and on the behalf of our communities by NHS England at the regional or national level. And then the next stage of that process in another 12 months' time will be that we will take on the commissioning of highly specialist services. Previously, we were commissioning local services, and then elements of specialist and other local services were commissioned elsewhere, and there's a possibility of divergence in terms of meeting the needs of the population. And now we'll be doing that all in one place, and the community will be a big part of the co-production of deciding how those services are delivered, where they're delivered, and what's important in terms of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So we are responsible for planning, buying and monitoring health services from healthcare providers such as hospitals, GP practices for our local population, but we do that in partnership with them, and that's a very different approach than has been taken before. We also have a performance monitoring role as an ICB, and that means that it's our responsibility to make sure that the services that we commission, that the organisations we commission them from, are financially healthy and sustainable, that deliver the highest level of quality and safety that we would expect, and that they are well led and governed in terms of the way that they make decisions. Next slide, please. So in terms of the clinical commissioning group for the quarter one of last year, their key achievements were the smooth transition from the closure of the CCG into the establishment of NHS Dorset as an integrated care board. And I wouldn't underestimate the level of work involved in that in order to meet all the legal requirements of the new statute in the new legislation. Our continued response to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and the delivery of a robust vaccination programme was a really key achievement, and Dorset had one of the highest COVID vaccination rates in England, so I think we need to be really proud of that, and as a consequence the incidence of COVID was managed very well. Dorset practices performed above the national average in all key areas in the 2021 GP patient survey, and that has actually been replicated into 22 survey as well, so that was another really key achievement. In terms of the risk, the increase in costs in personal health commissioning has been a risk and continues to be a risk as some of our communities' needs are more complex than before, and so we need to start to think about different packages of care to support them to remain independent for as long as possible. We all have a financial challenge, and we still have that, and that is replicated across the NHS with increasing demand for services as a result of an older population. The demand for acute mental health inpatient beds has increased, and that was on the increase, I think, probably before COVID, but COVID has exacerbated that with the impact in terms of our community's psychological and emotional well-being following the pandemic, and particularly the lockdown period. Workforce sustainability remains a challenge, and that is not unusual for rural areas where we need to think of different ways of recruiting people, and also different ways of making services more attractive for our communities to want to work in, and so that our young people choose to stay in Dorset post-education rather than leave. And then our capacity in general practice, because again, we've been very lucky in this area. We have a very high level of performance from general practice, but we are now starting to feel the pinch that other parts of the country are feeling in terms of the difficulty of recruiting new GPs and having the capacity to support initially trainee GPs so that they can keep them in Dorset. Slide, please, Louise. The performance of the clinical commissioning groups, the drive to continue to tackle the long waits, and we were able to eradicate our 2-year waiters last year in line with the government's targets that were set, and this year you'll see that we are working on trying to reduce waste to no longer than at 78 weeks. The Clinical Commissioning Group continue to lead work on the Dorset Health Villages in Dorchester and in Poole with the outpatient assessment centres, and that's been a great success in terms of reducing waits in some specialties and increasing the efficiency with which those services operate. And then we also saw an increased use of population health management approaches to address the overall health and well-being of the population, where we start to target different areas of our population based on the level of deprivation and the different approaches we might want to take to increase engagement in health services and reduce overall health. And the work we've done on COPD is a great example of that, where different types of engagement with our communities has reduced the number of emergency admissions throughout winter last year for respiratory conditions. So we continue to progress that work going forward. Next slide, please. And then we move into the NHS Dorset and its establishment in July. And we work with a number of partners, as I said before, to deliver the 4 aims of integrated care systems which were set out in the legislation by government. And those aims, you can see, are improving outcomes, tackling inequality, enhancing productivity, and supporting social and economic development. And I think for us, the variation in outcomes that we achieve across health services is something that we need to tackle. And we're doing work on redeveloping our service umbrella so that we have Dorset-wide service specifications. So your experience of going to any of our providers should be no different, whilst the delivery mechanism might be different in the location that you're in, depending on the needs of the community, the transport infrastructure, and other factors that influence that. We need to be more productive. The NHS has lost a huge amount of productivity since COVID, and we need to start to move that up. That's one of the ways that we will start to reduce some of our waits for planned care. But I think the real prize of us coming together as a broader partnership beyond health is that we start to get more involved with the wider partnership in tackling inequalities across our communities, and doing that through the work that we all need to contribute to around social and economic development. Next slide, please. So what were our achievements in the first 9 months? So we're really proud of the hard work and commitment of all of our teams, not just across the ICB, but across the system, in how we've come together as partners to develop a shared purpose, develop an integrated care strategy, and now think about what the priorities might be for the next 5 years. And particularly the work that we did on engaging our communities in that work, making sure that everything that was in our integrated care strategy was driven by the voices of our community through a whole ranging series of interviews with them, which was trying to get underneath the detail of what it was like for them as individuals to live in Dorset and what they needed from us as a broader partnership to improve the quality of their lives, to improve their ability to achieve personal happiness, but also to move into a place of economic stability. So we met all of our statutory requirements when we set up the ICB, which was very positive. As I said, we developed the partnership strategy. We received excellent results in our first staff survey, which placed us as second in the country in out of all of the 42 ICBs. And we were shortlisted for a number of awards last year due to the work that we've done. Next slide, please, Louise. What are our risks going forward? We've got a huge financial challenge. Demand for services continues to outstrip the capacity that we have to manage them. So we need to find different ways of providing service. We need to be more productive. And that means not just changing the way that our teams work, but starting to use things like digital platforms more, so we start to be more productive and efficient. We also need to do a lot of transformation. There's a lot of duplication across the Dorset system, so we need to start to streamline services, connect them more, join them up more, so that our public have a better experience of using health and care across the system. They don't feel the join of services when they're referred from one element to the other, because very few of the people that use our services are only in touch with one part of the service. They're usually patients of their GP, they're in touch with secondary care, and they're also receiving support from local government. So joining those pathways up so that they flow more smoothly and give people a better experience and reduce duplication is really important. We're overspending on personal health commissioning, so we need to do some budget adjustment around that. We've got the oldest population in England, and so it's very unlikely that that spend is going to reduce. So we've got to think about ways of right sizing that budget. Our ambulance response times, whilst they're good in Dorset, we are responsible for commissioning ambulance services for the whole of the South West region. Those response times are not good everywhere, and they're not consistently good. So we need to do more work on remodelling urgent and emergency care services and making sure that ambulances are not queuing up outside emergency departments and are instead responding in the right way at the right time frame for the conditions that our public are experiencing. We've got a high demand for acute mental health inpatient beds. Equally, we have delays in getting those individuals who are ready to be discharged out into the appropriate environment for their ongoing care. So we've got work to do there. And we have delays in hospital discharge, not just for inpatient mental health beds, but for inpatient beds across our acute and community sector. We've put a lot more resource, or our local government colleagues have this year, together with us, into the out-of-hospital provision, but we've still got more to do there to make sure that people are discharged in a timely way. Because we know for every day that an elderly, frail person stays in hospital longer than they need to when they are medically fit, that increases the chances of them going into long-term care because they start to decompensate in terms of muscle wastage. And there's also an increased chance that they're going to get a hospital-acquired infection. So we need to move on that, and we need to start to see some better progress on it. And then finally, we've got long waits for planned care, both in acute and mental health. And while we are on target with meeting the national timeline, I think there's a conversation we need to have with each other about whether we're prepared to go further and faster in order to reduce those waits, because again, we know that you wait longer for elective care, you are more likely to deteriorate while you're on the waiting list, and then the procedure that you need. Next slide, please, Louise. So our performance as an integrated care board, we've developed new discharge pathways with our partners, and they are having a significant impact on reducing the number of delays in hospital for discharges. So I think that's a real positive, and we need to keep going with that work. As I said, we delivered on the national challenge around reducing elective waits, but we've got further to go. And we were the second best performing system in the South West for a number of patients going to diagnostics, because we've made big improvements there. And our business case for a new diagnostic centres was approved, and we've now got 2 centres working in 2 of our most deprived communities in Wales and Boston. And that means that communities there can access diagnostics faster, which means for things like cancer, they're going to get new reimbursement, which is fantastic. Next slide. So you can read more in our annual report, which is available online. But just so that you have a clearer view of our commitments, we are absolutely committed to improving quality and how we ensure continuous improvement in the quality of services that we commission. And we have agreed as a system our continuous improvement methodology, and we will continue to work on that in terms of improving services and the quality of them, but not just the quality, the access of services and how efficient they are for the use of the public. We have made a commitment that we will work with our people and communities, and in a way that we've not done that before, really putting them at the centre of decision making, that we engage them fully in being a partner to the decisions that we take, and particularly when we start to think about what we do, what we call at place, which is in our 2 local authority boundaries. The aim eventually is that our communities will have the biggest say in how services are delivered and how public funding is spent in order to achieve better health and well-being. And we need to move to that place slowly by building positive relationships of equal partnership. We're committed to reducing health inequality and supporting the broader and social economic development. And that means being a good employer, making sure that we are employing as many people as we can from our local area, working with our educational institutions to make sure that our children are studying qualifications that enable them to enter into public service and see that as a long-term career. And that includes offering apprenticeships and different ways of getting people into service. We are a care leavers pilot site, a first implementer. That means giving care leavers the support to be able to enter into public service as long as we know that they will not only have career progression, but then it means procuring as much as we can locally so that we keep local people interested in supply chains. And that is important, quite important piece of work. It means also working with local businesses and with our public sector partners to make sure we are offering decent wages that enable people to have a reasonable level of household wealth so they're not dependent on the public benefit system, and also that they can then achieve social mobility within their household. And it also means doing what we need to do on the green agenda, not just talking about it and not just having a strategy, but actually starting to make it real. One, because it leads to healthier communities. Two, because we all have an obligation around social environment and the green agenda, but also because it creates employment. So we need to think about how we do that and work with a broad partnership in a way that makes sense to that. And ensuring that NHS Dorset is well led, has appropriate decision-making processes, manages risk in an appropriate way, and has the right internal controls in place to make sure that it spends its money wisely, that it can demonstrate value for money to the taxpayer that funds the services that we offer, and that we make decisions that ensure that we provide services of quality and that they're safe and they're accessible to the communities that need them. And you can clearly see there what we've got in terms of the year ahead. These are our 5-year forward plan objectives with partners, and you can see that at least 2 of them focus on children and young people. That's because if we don't start to improve the way that we offer service to children and young people and improve their health and well-being, then we're going to see in the next 15 to 20 years a repeat of some of the poor health challenges that we've got. And then there's an opportunity to focus on deprivation, some of our more deprived communities that are struggling most, and also how do we support people as they move into older age to remain independent and still being able to contribute and feel valued and as if they belong. Next slide. And now I'll hand over to Rob Morgan, who's our Chief Finance Officer, who will take you through the annual accounts. Thank you.
Rob, I am also conscious of time because we need to start the public meeting at 1:45. So, and I expect you to open for questions and things.
Thanks. Can you, if I face this way, can you hear me behind? Yeah. Okay, good. So I won't spend too long on. Thanks, Jenny, on this. Effectively, this is about the money. Clearly, it's the finance, some of the CCG and the ICB. Effectively, I'm going to just talk about 5 key duties that we have as a CCG and an ICB, and we are required to present that at our AGM as well. So the first 2 of them are about the amount of money we receive in the Department of Health. The following 2 are then a subset of that about we get rules within there about how we spend the money on certain things. And then the final one's just about the cash, just the fact the way the money, we don't get given £1.6 billion at the start of the year and then drain our bank account. We draw down every month. We have to forecast how much cash we need, then we draw it down. And at the end of the year, we have to work with a certain tolerance of the amount of money left in the bank, which is quite a small amount. So the first duty is around what we call the RDEL. That's the Revenue Department Expenditure Limit. Revenue expenditure is effectively your day-to-day spending. So it would be like what we spend at the supermarket. It's about pay, it's about paying for the services. It's that day-to-day running of our businesses. That's different to the second second duty, which is around the CDEL, which is the Capital Department Expenditure Limit. And that's more about those assets that you have, so the estate, the IT systems that will last for a long time. So on the first one, we get a certain amount of money given to us to run our services, and of course, we have to stick within that limit. So if you just move on to the next slide. At planning, because we are told how much we get given before the year starts, we were told that between the CCG and the ICB, we could expect to get just under £1.6 billion for Dorset. And that's a huge number. It feels a massive number, doesn't it? And if you do the maths there, that the CCG was in existence for 3/12 of a year, so a quarter. So there's no surprise that a quarter of the money was CCG and 3/4 of the money was for the ICB. So we set plans to spend £1.6 billion. We publish our plans. The reality of it is that as we move through the year, we often get given a bit more money. So we get given what's called non-recurrent money. And they are sort of pump priming pieces of money or money for special reasons. So usually we end up getting money ahead of winter. It used to be called winter planning. I think it's called demand and capacity money now. So actually we received £100 million more than the 1.59 billion. So we got just under £1.7 billion. Just because we receive £100 million doesn't mean we stick it in our pocket and it's a surplus. We have to spend it. Clearly, we have to spend on the services that it's intended for. So pleased to say that for both the CCG and the ICB, we met the RDEL requirement, so the revenue resource requirement, that we spent what we had and we didn't overspend, I think is really the message on that one. If you just move on to the next one. The next one's around the capital. Now, when we get onto the next slide for the numbers, and sometimes I have to check myself because I'm going to say it's quite a small number and yet it's still millions, but we are talking in very big numbers with billions. The ICB, and that's what we're talking about, our ICB accounts, we're not paying for all the capital around our providers, so for hospitals and things like that. Okay, we're responsible for primary care estate, responsible for the IT equipment, so it's quite a small number compared to what you would see in provider accounts, how much they spend on capital. So again, it's the same thing. We get given a limit of what we can spend, and we have to spend within that. Just as an aside, we also now, as part of being in a system control total environment, we have to also make sure that as a system, our providers live within their capital limits as well. And we have to make sure that as a whole Dorset system, we do also live within that means. And that's the same with the revenue as well. So if you just move on. So this is about as complicated as any of my slides are going to get. There's two boxes there. The first one is that NHS England actually hold money and they account for it. So it's in their books. So in the top, there's £1.4 million that is spent in Dorset, but it's not in the ICB's books. Okay, that's in the NHS England's books. And that's to do with minor improvement grants for general practice estate. That's not a lot of money, as you can see, just £287,000. And then you've got the GP, IM&Ts, the IT equipment for GP practice as well, which is more, it's 1.1 million. But again, it's not a whole load of money in the big scheme of things. And then the bit that actually comes to us at the bottom is just under £1 million. And that's really for what we're looking at here, paying for the building, paying for the IT equipment that we as an ICB use. So again, it's a fairly small number. And again, we live within that number. So we achieve that duty. We can move on. The next one, within that first duty, the revenue resource limit, what we spend on day to day, which covers pay, we get a limit on how much we're allowed to spend on running the ICB. So we called it a running cost limit, but it's effectively the administrative costs of running this organisation. It's £17 million. It's a national formula that looks at the population that Dorset has, and you get £1 per head of population. So we all get the same amount per head of population, no matter what ICB you're in the country. If you're a larger ICB, you get money therefore, and if you're a smaller ICB, you get less money. We're around we're one of the smaller ICBs, but we do get £17 million a year to pay on the administrative costs of running the organisation. So if you'd like to click on. The fourth duty, something slightly wrong on the heading. Again, another piece of information that we're told we have to do is the mental health investment standard. So within that first duty, with all the money we get, that £1.7 billion, there's something called the mental health investment standard. And what that says is that you have to invest in mental health at an amount that is proportionately higher than your overall growth. So you proportionately invest more in mental health. This is a national standard. It was introduced quite a few years ago, and it's called the parity of esteem at the time, and it's moved into the mental health investment standard. It's something that is absolutely looked at really, really hard across the country, because for years mental health didn't get the investment it was required, and this standard has shifted money towards mental health. Always questions about, is it enough still? Of course. And again, what we see there is that we spent just under £120 million, which was over £5 million increase in the previous year. The mental health investment standard said that we should spend 119 million, 190.1. We were just under 120, so we overachieved. So we shifted more money towards mental health than the standard required us to, which is a good thing, again. So if you just move on. This slide is just a bit of a breakdown of how that 1.7 billion pie is split up. It's probably easier just the graphic on the bottom right. So you'll see that for every pound we spend, over half of it just goes on secondary care. Now that's your hospital services, your acute hospitals and things. Primary care also gets a fair amount of money. Then you're getting into mental health. Tricia had mentioned the personal health commissioning, and then the community services. So you'll see that pretty much takes up most of the money, those big chunks. It's always interesting sometimes to ask people about, is that what you'd expect to see, actually? Because, usually our first contact with health services is in the community, and then you see how the money is spent. There's also things in there like the Better Care Fund. That's where we put money into joint pots with our local authority partners as well, to encourage more joint work with our local authorities, and that's something again that as we move into the future we'll be looking at working more together on. And then again, obviously you've got the admin costs as well, and a little bit of other stuff. If you'd like to move on. So the final one is just an interesting one. It probably doesn't mean much to anyone, but I'm always quite proud of the finance teams on this one. When you run this through, and remember that not everything's cash, there's accruals and things like that, but there's over 1.3 billion pounds worth of cash transactions that went through, and we ended up within £41,000. Now again, that is a set limit as a percentage of your overall spend that you have to finish the year in. So what the NHS doesn't want is, they don't want integrated care boards saying we need 10 million next month and actually they only spend 8 million, because that leaves 2 million unspent and causes a problem. They want you to be accurate on your forecasting. So I guess the point on this slide really is, of course we achieved the standards, but what it shows is that we're pretty good at working through that drawdown. We live within the limits, and every month we always do. So we never get to a point where we can't pay the services, we haven't pulled down enough money. We get it pretty much right month on month on month. And that's it for the 5 duties of the ICB. There's one more slide. Patricia's probably touched on some of them around the risks, but that's again, he's talking about 23-24. That's now. We're not far off halfway through the year, probably not quite halfway through the year. So we already had these in our plan as well, about recovering the core services and productivity. We know there's a big productivity challenge in the NHS now. After COVID, there's a lot more people working in the NHS. We know the waiting lists are high, and we know the activity's down, so we know that's one of our challenges. We've got to improve ambulance response and A&E waiting times. We've got the NHS long-term plan ambitions. That's looking at trying to see how we can make things more sustainable. We've got this big challenge financially, but we've got workforce challenges. We've got challenges all over place, as have our partners as well, and that's why we need to work together, which comes into the final point, which is around transforming the NHS. And that's really working with our partners. We've got the Integrated Care Partnership, we've got the Integrated Care Partnership strategy, we've got the joint 5-year forward plan. There's lots of jointness in this, there's lots of working together. That's where we need to be moving to transform things, so that we can continue to present rather dull slides saying we managed to hit the financial numbers. Behind that, there's a whole load of good stuff that goes on.
Thank you very much. So firstly, I want to say thank you to Patricia and Rob for bringing the last year of work that we've done and set out in the annual report and accounts, and also for setting that out quite clearly. So thank you for that. We did actually go out to the public for questions, and we haven't received any. So I'm going to, in the next 5 minutes, just open for any questions or comments around the table. So is there anybody? Matthew?
Thank you, Jenny. Thanks, Patricia, and Rob. Thanks, Rob, for presenting the numbers so clearly. As colleagues know, my role on this board really is representing mental health as a partner. So I want to just say something about the mental health investment standard, which you presented really clearly and well, Rob. And I would just advocate that that's a minimum standard. So when we have a discussion about overachievement, that's the right place to be and the place that we would want to be in terms of seeing and delivering the strategic change that's in line with our population health ambitions.
Anybody else? I know the board has seen the accounts and the annual report before when it was all pulled together, which is on the website. But are there any more questions or comments? Okay.
I just wanted to say that reading the papers that went with this, I was struck by the breadth of ambition that we are showing there in looking forward, and I think that's something that should be welcomed by everybody around the board, because we do want this to be different from the old system, and I think the report does show that even in the early stages, we are setting out our stall in such a way as to make it clear where we want to be and where we want to go and what those ambitions are. I think that's really important, that right from the get-go we have those set out there so clearly.
Just building on that, because it's a really important point, and it's kind of a question and a statement, is getting that balance right between tackling the priorities today as we see them, but then building good foundations to get to the root cause of these problems is a really difficult balance to get, because it can look like we're not putting enough money into the problems of today when actually we're putting money into stopping those problems recurring and recurring. And it's just a question really to both Rob in terms of financial and Patricia generally. Do you think that that balance is set right at the moment? Do you see that balance changing? And do you have any comments on that?
I'll let you go.
So the balance between the doing and the
now and the future.
Yeah. So we've been having this debate recently.
That's what
I think we're having this conversation actually yesterday, and you know you've got a number of priorities that compete with each other. We've got to make sure the services we provide are safe. We've got to make sure our staff are cared for, so they'll do a good job. We've got to deliver on the money, and we've got to make sure that people can access services where they need to. And then we've got the balance of the here and now and the future. And I get asked all the time, well, which is it? Is it going to be all the quality? Which are we going for? Is it here and now, or is it the future? And the reality is, the answer is all of them. You know, because we can't deliver on quality unless we're spending our money wisely. We can't deliver good access unless we're also thinking about quality and safety, because access is part of the quality and safety question. So it's all of it. And we were having a conversation this week about the fact that we need, as an executive team, as much as we can, stay on the balcony of the strategy and where we're heading. And yes, let our teams get on with some of them with the here and now and make sure they deliver on the operational day to day, and us only going down into the weeds of that when we absolutely need to support them and being there for as short a time as possible and get back up on the balcony, because otherwise we lose the thread of where we're heading. And the reality for us is, if we don't concentrate on today and the next 5 to 10 years and set the foundations for the transformation programme that we need to deliver this year, we're not going to be ready when we need to be to step off that platform and do that transformation. That means that we improve the overall health and well-being of our population, that they live longer and healthier, and we're part of that journey with them. So it's both. And I think we're just getting round to understanding what proportion of each we really need to focus on to make sure we manage to move both agendas forward in parallel.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Rob, did you want to add anything?
It is a conundrum, isn't it? So those statutory duties, no matter how much we'd like them to be important, to get there, they're annual, and there's always that tension between all running to one side of the pitch and forgetting about the other end, isn't there? And I know that that's just kind of like stating the obvious, but that's that conundrum. The final slide I put up was talking about transformation. We have to do the transformation in order to be sustainable in the future. But it's really difficult to do the transformation if we're overwhelmed and in the here and now moment. And then I do always think, yeah, I'm in my ivory castle in finance, aren't I, looking down? I'm not on the front line. And the front line are really, really pressured and really, really tired. So it's a really difficult ask, but we know that's the challenge. And it is that balance that somehow we've got to try and figure out how we don't just all run to one side of the pitch, because we'll let go of something and it's just trying to keep that net and trying to catch everything. So yeah, no real answer there apart from we're more than aware of it, and we that's what we're all trying to grapple with as a board and in our partner organisations as well.
Patricia did say also you're doing the thinking through now about where you put the money. So
and I think part of the conversation has been, yes, there are all these national priorities, but actually, are they what's important to the community? Because if they're not, then we need to deliver the ones that are, and we need to have a dialogue about the others, because actually there's no point in us delivering 35 priorities if only 20 of them are important to our community. Because that's at the end of the day what we're here to do.
Okay, I've got Dan and John, and we've got 1 minute left, so you're both going to have to be really quick.
At the risk of stealing your thunder, Jenny, I just wanted to say thank you to all the exec teams across the system. A lot of work goes into landing. There's more work to do, as we've heard, but to land that position, performance and finance, I think it's really important that we acknowledge the exec team's leadership, but then across the teams they lead, the work that they put in over the course of the year. So I suspect you were going to say that as well, but I'll say it first and then you say it again.
John.
It was a very similar point. What really came across to me is that there's been a lot of change in this first year, the CCG moving into the ICB context. But to hear about the engagement within the teams, but actually that team coming together in service of the people of Dorset, to be able to have a first period, but then, Rob, you outlined some of the things for the future and that transformation to deliver outcomes here in Dorset. I really heard that, and I wanted to acknowledge that the whole team who have done that, integrated team.
Great. So I was just going to close by saying that the report demonstrates and Patricia emphasised that actually we've been able to achieve the successes we have and manage the risks that we've been managing because of the integrated collective work. And Patricia talked many times about the various different partners. And we will only continue to serve our communities well if we make sure that stays as the kind of bedrock through the things that we're doing. So thank you, of course, to the ICB team and all the work that you've put in, because it was a huge ask to set up a brand new organisation, close down the old one, but still achieve some really good things. But also thank you to the wider partners who've walked this journey with us and been part of that. Been part of that journey, really, that success. So thank you. I'm going to move us on because we are now into the public meeting, the meeting in public, sorry, of the ICB board meeting. The apologies that I gave earlier stand for this part of the meeting also, so I won't go through those again. But I do want to acknowledge the some additional attendees that we have and do some welcomes. So I think we've got online, I can't tell from the initials, but I think we've got online Sarah Ivory Donnelly, who's a CQC Inspection Manager, and Amy Harris, and Charles Rendell, who's a CQC Policy Officer. And I think all three of you are online. Hello. And you are the ICS CQC inspection team, and I think we're going to be meeting with you soon, because for people that don't know, we have we put ourselves forward to be the pilot around the CQC inspection of ICSs. And we will be having discussions and starting that work very soon in the autumn. So welcome to all of you. We've also got Michael Gravel, who's the Deputy Director of Finance, who's here for item 5.5, and he'll be going through the infrastructure with us. We've got Pam O'Shea, I think, who's Deputy Chief Nursing Officer for the Portland Barge update. And then we've got Vicky Melville, who's the Head of Nursing and Quality, who's here observing as part of her development. In addition to that, we have got members of the public attending. We've got Jeremy Allen for the Lewis Manning Hospice, who's Hospice Care, who's the chair. So welcome. And also Claire Galley, who's the Lewis Manning Hospice Care CEO. So welcome to both of you. We've got Professor Philip Marfleet, and I think we've got a question from you later as well that we'll come to. We've got Sue Payne, who's Senior Healthcare Partnership Manager for Pfizer. You've seen Sue before, but welcome again, Sue. And then we've got R. Sylvester, whom I think I can't see you from here, but I know you're there, who's also here. And I think we've also got a question from you later, Mr. Sylvester, which we'll come to. So that's apologies as they were earlier. That's the welcomes. Can I ask then, before we move forward, whether or not there are any declarations of interest? No? Okay. So let's move on then. We're going to move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Just get my paper up. So I'm going to turn very quickly through the pages and ask if there are any amendments or corrections to the minutes as we have them. So going straight to page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, 6, 7, and 8. So I haven't seen any indication. So can I take those as an accurate reflection of the last meeting? Thank you very much. And then for the action log, I think you'll see that we've got 2 that were due for this meeting. So the first was an action for Patricia to bring back a paper on housing, and we have got that later today. And we also had the discussion that was being held between the Patricia as the ICB CEO and the joint CEO for Dorset County Hospital and Dorset Healthcare, Matthew. And that's happened, isn't it? That's underway. So the next one is due in the autumn, although I noticed that it's suggested. And that's around the dementia working group updates, which I think we've got. It's been to CPRG as well, hasn't it? So, or it's going to CPRG. And then all the rest are closed, I think. Anything else? No. So then we're going to move into the patient story, and I think Siobhan, you're going to lead us through on that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's good to see everyone. Apologies for not being in the room. I might be a little bit of a reminder that COVID is still with us. Just to say the patient story today, I think it's really good for the board to, at this time in the NHS, it is quite tough out there. And actually, this is a really, it's a story to be proud of how our staff actually are incredibly caring and compassionate. And Naomi, who is our wonderful patient in the middle of this story, she actually was admitted to a ward at Royal Bournemouth Hospital with an eating disorder. So actually there's a wider conversation, I think, for us to have, but actually primarily, and Naomi is incredibly special, it demonstrates, I think, how proud we should be of our frontline staff and what they do each and every day, and also the carers support across the trust. But I'll hand over to the video.
Thank you, Siobhan.
Apologies, I've just got a volume issue.
You sat in the right place anyway, Stephen.
I thought you get it resolved because it's definitely worth a watch, this video.
Teams chat, as we've done it through the external sound.
I'm sharing your distress.
Yeah, good. We can share it again.
Great when it works. Yeah.
Shows the viewing tendency. Wouldn't want to do mine because it shows my Wikid's off again.
I'm here in Ward 1 at Bournemouth Hospital, and I've been here for about 3 months due to my eating disorder. I was very unwell when I first came in, and I was physically unwell and mentally unwell, like passing out a lot, and I was quite delusional as well. And I didn't really think I needed food to survive, and so I was quite non-compliant with treatment, and I did have to go to the ICU for a few days for them to like stabilize me and insert a tube. And then they started the refeeding process when I came out of the ICU, and it brought me back to Ward 1. The staff here on this ward have been absolutely incredible. I wasn't making the progress that I maybe should have been making, and I wasn't really able to follow the meal plan a lot of the time, and I got distressed a lot, and I also have Tourette's, and so that's been something that I feel that I have educated them on. That's definitely been a challenge for them, but one that they have embraced. When I've been having breakdowns or meltdowns or tic attacks, they don't just leave me. They will take the time, and they will come in and sit with me. They will sit with me as I cry my eyes out, and they're super busy, but they take the time out to come and sit with me and help me calm down and remind me that I'm safe and that I'm okay and that I will get through this, because they care. I was getting meal support from the eating disorders team. However, the meal support started a couple of weeks before Christmas, and then around Christmas, because of how the days fell, there was bank holidays all the time, and there was weekends. The eating disorder team doesn't work weekends or bank holidays, so there was just a load of empty days, and for me to make or to keep up with any progress I was making, I needed that extra support. I got introduced to Mary, and Mary came in and to meet me one afternoon, and we clicked straight away, and she's just such a bubbly, happy person, and I was like, we're going to get on, this is going to be fine.
I wasn't sure, so I said to Naomi, I'm not sure how I can support you. What would you like me to do? And that's when she said at mealtime.
She even came in on Christmas Day to help me with lunch on Christmas Day, which honestly meant so much to me because like none of my family could come in at Christmas Day lunch to help me eat lunch because obviously they were having Christmas lunch at home, and part of the deal of me getting home leave to go home in the afternoon for Christmas was that I would have eaten lunch.
So I went in on Christmas Eve to see if she was all right and does she have support? And she was telling me she was quite excited that she was allowed home. I said, that's fantastic. She said, yes, but she said, I don't think I've got any mealtime support. She said, and I have to be seen to be eating to go home. So I said, would you like me to pop in? And she said, oh, it's Christmas. And I said, it's another day to me. It's not really, you know.
And so if it wasn't for Mary, I wouldn't have been able to go home for Christmas. So honestly, I am so thankful for her. Like the fact Christmas Day, she gave up her time to come in and sit with me and eat with me. And she makes me laugh. She keeps me distracted. I'll never forget the people that have helped me here. Mary, the staff on Ward 1, site liaison, just everyone. They have helped me so much. And I'll just forever be grateful.
Can I just add, I mean, I do think the role of volunteers within the health service generally is just quite amazing in Dorset. People know I'm relatively new to Dorset. We have over 300 volunteers across University Hospitals Dorset, and they do an incredible job. I'm not sure we could do our roles without them. And I think we really should. That's a real testament actually to working in Dorset. I'll stop there, and I think there's probably a wider conversation, questions, discussion.
Thank you, Siobhan, and thank you to Mary and to Mary and Naomi for just allowing us to share in that story. And see the richness of what the NHS can deliver. But as you said, Siobhan, we know that we can't deliver these things without the volunteer community sector. So it really was powerful in bringing that to life and bringing a real story to our attention. So I'm going to go to questions and comments. I can see quite a few hands going up. I'll go with Debbie first.
Thank you. I mean, what a powerful story, and it's not the first time I've seen this, and got me to tears the first time I saw it, if I'm perfectly honest, and thought it was a really good story to bring to the board. So thank you for doing that, Siobhan. Just real credit to Naomi and Mary, as you've said, for the strength to actually come forward and actually do that video. I think I can't acknowledge that enough. I think it does raise some real positives, but it also raises some questions that we need to address, doesn't it? You know, we don't have an eating disorder over the weekends. We don't have an eating disorder service at bank holidays. You know, people don't stop eating, do they, on sort of weekends and bank holidays? Really, powerful how we've demonstrated that we've actually engaged the voluntary sector and how we're using alternatives, but nevertheless still poses the how we work towards trying to deliver that in a time when we don't have the abundance of workforce. So it's just posing those challenges again for me. But yeah, really powerful, and it's a good story, and there's always some learning, isn't there? And something we could do differently.
Thank you. Yes, it's a really powerful story, and not a story actually. It's somebody's lived experience. For me, it highlights also what can happen when the magic is when the partnership works. But as part of my going to different parts of service in the system, I went to the New Eating Disorders Unit at St Anne's a few weeks ago, and it is a fantastic development. So I'm really pleased that we've got that, really proud that we've got that. I'm proud actually about the fact that not only have we got that facility, it offers all of the things that should be offered, and but also because it was developed in partnership with patients, and so when you go in, it feels like home, and I think that really matters. and that therapeutic environment where, because when you go home, the circumstances are different, and trying to create an environment that feels and looks like home, not like hospital. Those circumstances are really important, and the commitment from the staff around trying to make a difference really, really stood out. So I think that is going to be a game changer for us in terms of the response that we get to people with eating disorders. We've got more to do, but I think it's a really, really good start.
Forbes then, Matthew.
Okay, thank you. I'm quite remote, so I hope you can hear me. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it was a really interesting and powerful video. My challenge really is about what can we do in terms of early intervention for such people. You know, we're talking about really when people have got to the worst element of their illness, and you know they are very complex, a very complex illness to treat. Often young women, but not always, can be males and can be older people as well. Our waiting times in Dorset are still quite long. So there's an issue about waiting times, but there's also, I think, an issue about can we use perhaps the education system even better about trying to address the issues around self-esteem, eating, although I think that seemed to be part and parcel of such presentations, because really when you're at the stage of being in a hospital ward having to be tube fed, you know, that's not a good place to be.
I'll come back in a minute to that question, Matthew.
Great, thank you. So I'm first of all just to recognise the power of that story. What an amazing piece of courage to tell a story like that. Really powerful impact. And of course, what we've seen today is a window into someone's experience, and there's a big story before the window we've seen, and there'll be a big story after the window that we've seen. And so I think for me, some of the messages there for us as a board are to think about some of the boundaries that we've got for people and within our system, and to try and think about how we make those boundaries permeable. So when we talk about mental health, it's not somewhere in isolation. So mental health isn't just about the specialised settings of care, but those specialised settings of care are really important. So all of the developments that we've got going on in our system to improve those for children and for adults in terms of new developments, building on the work around eating disorders, they're really important. But mental health runs through every aspect of healthcare, but also normal life, as Forbes was describing. So thinking about how we design those partnerships across healthcare and then with volunteers, with communities, are really important things to consider. And I think a lot of this is at the heart really of our ICS strategy, coming back to the 5 pillars that we really want to achieve and make progress on. And the final thing I'd say is, I think the other message from this is just a reminder for us all that fundamentally the delivery of healthcare is about people, and it's about people coming alongside people at some of the most difficult moments in their lives, and that's what we're about. So as we go through our board agenda today and we talk about buildings, it's everything we do has an impact on people, and that climate that we're setting for people is really important.
How do we want to respond to Forbes' question about the kind of pre-intervention? Because we know that one of the issues that we also have at the moment is that if people are using social media as an example, and they go out searching for other individuals that have eating disorders, the algorithms will always bring those up. So part of the struggle that health has at the moment is that people can easily diagnose or become worse because everything they're seeing is actually steering them in that. So, you know, that's just one element. So who wants to pick up, say, Forbes' question about what do we do, how do we get upstream of this?
Sorry, Jenny. So there is a huge amount of work going on in this area in terms of how we link through families and young people into schools, which was specifically picked up. That focus on early help is at the heart of all the service changes we're trying to make. And we've got a Families First pilot that's running in the Dorset Council area. We're going to hear about that in future meetings. Got a huge amount of work going on across the SEND and children and young people agenda in the BCP footprint as well. And again, we'll in a future board meeting, we're going to have a sort of deep dive into some of the work going on there. There are challenges all over the place, but the drive to push more support into that early help space that's non-clinical to help people make good choices or feel supported. And we saw it in the clinical setting there, but guided support is really, really important. It doesn't need a doctor or a nurse to do that. It can fundamentally change people's lives, and we see it time and time again. So we want to make it the heart of how we work, not just as a kind of occasional benefit or an accidental benefit that might occur. So there's loads and loads to do. And I focused on children and young people. I know that Forbes is correct. It's true across lots of other groups as well, adults and male and female and so on. So it's not just about children and young people, it's about adults as well, but the focus is entirely there. And alongside that, investing and working with our voluntary sector partners through the BCS Assembly that we've established for Dorset is also going to give us better access to organisations and individuals that can really help in this area. And I think I want to tie that to Patricia's point as well. It's not saying that we've got the answer, so this is what you need to do. It's saying we need some help. How can you help? And sort of turning the sort of conversation around completely. But what we need to do as an ICB, as an ICS, is be ready to support that, and we are.
Thank you. So thank you again, Siobhan, for bringing this today. And I'm going to move us on now to your Chief Exec report, Patricia.
So first of all, apologies for the report being late in terms of circulation. But I hope you've all had a chance to read it. I'm not going to go through it in detail as usual. I'll see that it's read, and I'll just pick up a couple of points that I think are fairly important today. So obviously, our biggest risk across health at the moment is the continued industrial action by our doctors. We have strike dates identified for junior doctors and consultants this month, and we have a further 3 days scheduled for October. In this month, they will overlap by 24 hours, and they'll overlap in October, which escalates this dispute to a different level. We can't provide a huge amount of healthcare without junior doctors being supervised by consultants or them replacing those individuals in terms of the work schedule. So we will pay specific attention to those days where there's an overlap. As a system executive, we will start to scrutinise in more detail what the mitigating plans will be at provider level together collectively for those risk as much as possible. I'm really concerned as well around the week following the action and the pressure that not just our health partners will be under, but also local government as a result of that, as care packages will start to intensify. So we've got a grip of it, but it will be a very tricky few days, and we'll have to manage them. As a public service, risk management is our job. We're good at it, but this does move the dispute to a different level, and we hope that there is a resolution on this soon, so we can get back to normal. You'll note in the paper that it refers to the Women's Health Strategy, which was published earlier this year, and there is in that strategy a requirement to create a women's hub in Dorset. We have, as our commitment, taken that out to our community to get their views on it, and the Dorset Women's Network, which represents the interests of thousands of women across Dorset, is now working with our team on what they would like that to look like. And I think actually their preference at the moment is that we don't have a single hub, whether it's physical or virtual, that we do something very different. So once we've finished that co-production piece of work, then we'll bring something back to the board so you can be satisfied that we will be meeting the requirements of the strategy. Department of Health published a major condition strategy in the last couple of weeks. We just need to do a bit of due diligence on that work to make sure that the important pieces are cross-referenced in the work that we plan for the 5-year forward objectives going forward in the 5 pillars, and we'll do that work over the next few weeks. I've already mentioned that we are in the midst of the work on the CQC assessment, as we are one of the 2 national pilots, the other one being in Birmingham. The focus groups have already started, and in October we will be moving into the interview phase with a number of people around the table. We, as a system leadership team of chief executives, will be presenting the context of the ICB and the system and next week on the afternoon of the 14th, and partners will be joining that session, and we'll do a collective presentation to them, and then we'll probably spend a couple of hours fielding questions and talking to them in a discussion about some of the challenges, some of the things that we know are opportunities, and how we're moving forward together. So looking forward to that. Well, I am. I've done it before. Obviously, having been a provider chief exec, I don't know if some of our colleagues are looking forward to it in the ICB. But I am, because it's always a good thing. And then final thing in the paper before I just move on to public confidence is, obviously you will all have seen in the media the outcome of the Lucy Letby investigation and trial over the events at Chester, which are incredibly sad. Our thoughts need to be with the families that have been involved in this case, because it has been obviously incredibly sad. We're also fielding lots of anxiety from staff. One, because if you work in a neonatal unit, then your practice is heavily scrutinised and by all sorts of people as normal routine, and as it should be. Obviously, this heightens the level of scrutiny. But also because they are anxious and scared about the negative publicity around the NHS and how that makes them feel. And we're already starting to see at a national level people choosing not now to apply for their management, NHS management graduate training scheme as a result. So I think that we need to remember that this was an isolated case with an individual, and what I'm more concerned about is that it raises public confidence issues for us locally in terms of our communities about whether they think they can trust the NHS locally and that it's safe. And it's our job as leaders to make sure that it is safe. It's our job to manage risk. And, you know, we were told yesterday at the national meeting that the NHS manages risk in terms of the leadership on the whole very well, because the organisations we all lead have very, very complex agendas. But I think we need to remember that we do that job by encouraging people to use the different routes that they're having to speak up, whether it's our staff, whether it's our colleagues, or whether it's the community that we serve. And when they do speak up, we need to have environments where we are listening and we're responding appropriately in a way that means that we're taking the right action to make sure that we are constantly on an improvement journey around both safety and experience for the people that use our services and the people that work in our services. So I'll leave it there and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Patricia. And before I go to questions, I just want to again say thank you to all the partners that have contributed to the information in your report, because it's becoming richer as we move forward and provides quite a lot of interesting and key information. So thank you for that. So questions or comments for Patricia? Siobhan.
I can't let the sort of moment go without sort of reflecting a bit as a nurse and also chief exec of hospital, how obviously impactful everything that has happened around Countess of Chester is to all of us. And the last few weeks have been quite a time of reflection, I think personally and across the organisation. A lot of the clinicians, we're talking about it, we're discussing it. As Patricia said, our jobs, Matthew, Patricia and I having discussions about it, is to prevent this happening, and actually talking to our teams about what it is like in Dorset. It's easy with the benefit of hindsight, but quite a big discussion about the culture within an organisation, the priority around safety, the relationships between doctors, nurses, other staff and management, and actually how important that is within an organisation. So quite rightly, this will reverberate and we will learn a lot from the public inquiry, but an emphasis on safety culture, on continuous improvement. And from where we are within UHD, you'll see in the update at the back, we've got a real emphasis on our patient first quality improvement programme. And a key plank of that is an absolute priority around quality and safety. And I just thought it was important to reflect that with everyone.
Thank you, Graham.
So just an issue on the appendix, if I appendix 1, and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to flag this morning, so I didn't know I was raising it then. But just to raise our continued expression of slight concern around the way it's described around the potential coming together of Dorset County Hospital and Dorset Healthcare and that role, because I think you know that we've said before at this meeting that was originally done without any consultation with the local authorities, and we were very assured that it would only be a coming together of Chief Executive and Chair, and your report seems to indicate that's going more extensively without any consultation. So I need to get an urgent meeting. I just want to flag at this meeting that we have ongoing concerns about the potential impact of that coming together in the way that services are provided, which I think we've raised before, so I think people are aware of the issue. If not, I'm happy to expand on this one.
Matthew, do you want to say anything now, or are you happy to take that outside of the meeting?
Thanks, Graham. I'm very happy to take it outside of the meeting. I'm not kind of having come into the system in March. I'm not privy to all the history to the discussion, and I guess you've got my, and all partners have got my my fundamental commitment to recognising that Dorset Healthcare is actually the system-wide provider within the room, within the system, and that's incredibly important. And that's why I've been having conversations with you and others about the work that we want to do in the BCP area, beginning tests of change which bring our vision of care, the system's vision of care to life in terms of the out of hospital work and all the work that the NAPC are doing on our behalf. So I sort of repeat that commitment, and these changes where we're working together as two providers in a federated way are not about drawing services away from the east of the ICS. What we may want to construct together, and I'd be very open to this and would welcome it, is some way of providing you and other partners around this table with assurance, and that we might be able to work up some form of EQIA type approach, and I'd be very open to that conversation.
So sorry, I was just going to say, what I heard from Graham was about being involved, being consulted on the changes, not being informed. So that, for me, that's a slightly different thing to kind of being given the information.
Yeah.
But shall I leave you to pick that up outside, because I think there is, I think it's a valid point.
So how we can bring it perhaps through our Health and Wellbeing Board in a more open, discursive way, through the ICB would be helpful.
I think we need to be really careful about what we're saying, because I think what you're referring to, Graham, is the fact that Matthew is doing some work on structure. Is that what we're referring to?
Your wording also talks about consider how to bring the clinical strategies together for both organisations. So it goes beyond structure, and that's what I'm just flagging. Is I think we just want to have a discussion about that. I would have thought as active partners in the system, before bringing in the ICB.
I think that's a fair enough comment.
I understand that. I suppose my concern is, yes, talk about the integration of services, but if we start getting into structure, then I think we're into, well, are we talking about just that organisation? Why are we all? Should we be talking about that for everybody's organisations? I think we just need to be really careful about where we're drawing the boundaries, because there have been lots of changes to structure in BCP recently, and we haven't been consulted, we've been told. So I think we just need to be careful about where we're drawing the line on what we think are organisational freedoms and agree where we think that line is, as opposed to when colleagues need to be having dialogue across the system.
So this is simply the perspective of the coming together of two different organisations, not about within an organisation. Within an organisation, absolutely fine. Fine, let's look at the service impacts. This is about the coming together of two, which my councillors have expressed views about, as you know, and that's the bit I'm just seeing a bit more going on that they're not aware of. So they're saying to me what's happening here.
So Graham, I recognise your concerns. I recognise the issues that you're reflecting from your councillors. I don't think there's anything in this that hasn't been shared with partners in a way as we've gone along. But I do hear what you're saying, and I'm absolutely happy to give the commitment of coming together outside of this room to shape this with you and others if there are similar concerns, so that we make sure that we have the conversation together in a very open way.
So, I mean, I think, I don't know if you were trying to have an on this point, Debbie. I think it's important because I agree with Graham. I think there is a distinction between organisations making their own structural changes and two organisations coming together that could then have an impact right across the system. And we need to make sure that everybody is up to speed and contributing to that. So I've heard your assurances, and I will leave you to pick those up outside of the meeting.
Okay, and that's really helpful. And I'd just take us back to where this started, which is before where this has always been about what we can do for patients and people in a better way. So it's always been about the services we deliver. It's not just about appointments at the exec level.
Yeah, I'm not going to prolong it, but we know that there are concerns broader than what Graham's raising, that there might be differentials of services between the east and the west, and we've just got to avoid that's not the outcome. So yeah, let's pick it up out of here, and if there's stuff that needs to come back through here or through some other forums, we can take that then. So I've got Jonathan, and then Debbie, and then Forbes.
Okay. Just on the women's health clubs, maybe adapting thing, but that strategy, I think, was seminal in many ways. And the data behind it is shocking in some areas. And the way this is drafted, all we're doing is women's health club. So we're looking for reassurance that there's more going on in the system to try and create a culture.
The women's health hub first, because that was the priority for the government. Paul is the executive sponsor for the actual strategy, and he's working with women's groups to produce a response to the strategies so that we feed into the forward plan. So no, it's not just that.
Thank you, Debbie.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to come back very quickly on the Lucy Net, point of your paper, and just to say in support of our providers, you'll know as the board that we actually do quality assurance visits quite routinely to many of our ward areas, and I was proposing that I would ask my team to actually do sort of a QA visit to both of the neonatal units, just purely because it will give an opportunity for the staff to actually have a voice actually on their concerns. So wanted to do it in a supportive way, really. So hopefully Siobhan and Matthew will find that sort of helpful, because it will give us as a system some reassurance that we've listened to the findings, but also that actually it will sort of support the work you're doing to get that assurance from your DNS units. But I will just say that DC Letby could have been working anywhere. And I think that's what I've been telling my LMNS, which is the local maternity and neonatal system that's obviously leading the response to Lucy Letby at the moment. Nationally, it's gone that way, but actually, she could have been a nurse in an intensive care. She could have been a nurse somewhere else. It wasn't really related to neonates as such. But I think hopefully, if you find that helpful, we'll come in and just do a sort of. I'll obviously let you know when, and do a QA visit in the same way as we would normally do to any other ward areas.
Yeah, Debbie, just to say you're very welcome. As you can imagine, immediately after we were in the neonatal unit talking to staff, but I think it would be really valuable. Can I also say it wouldn't have to be a nurse? So the other issue here is, unfortunately, this person was a psychopath, and I think it really is. The more you consider, the real issue here is about safety culture, isn't it? And that's quite a broad umbrella, but you're very welcome, and I think it'd be very valuable.
Thank you, Siobhan. Forbes?
Yeah, thank you. First, I just wanted to acknowledge the comments made about the tragedy of the Lucy Letby situation, and I think it's really helpful to acknowledge the sensitivity with which this will have to be managed, both for patients but equally for staff, many of whom feel they've never been under such scrutiny. And if that's going to increase, that makes it sometimes quite difficult, they feel, to deliver the roles. That's not absolutely not to excuse it, but it's just to acknowledge the difficult nature. My point really was around the industrial action and the issues that this is causing. It's, again, it's another most unfortunate situation, and we don't seem to be seeing much white smoke, if you like, or progress. And of course, it could get worse before it gets better. It is having an impact. It is having an impact, obviously, on patient ways. And I just wondered if there's something more we could do, either acute colleagues or as a system, to inform patients about what their expectant wait might be. We talk about, increased capacity in general practice, avoiding duplication, streamlining, but there's an awful lot of concern being expressed through general practice. One, because of an escalating medical need, and two, because of a perception that we can do something and somehow to influence the waiting times within the acutes. And it's really treated very bluntly, if I'm honest, I think, with the acutes, and I know it's a very difficult situation, but they either get sent to general practice to say, well, go and see your GP and see if there's something they can do, or they get sent a letter which says, I'm very sorry, your appointment's been cancelled. Sometimes often alternative, but actually often it's just we'll be back in touch with you. So if we have got any capacity in general practice, which we don't have, but if there is any, then we don't want it used up in that, to deal with these issues, which could be managed in another way. We have addressed this with medical directors several months ago, but I don't believe we've seen the progress, and I think things really have now got much worse rather than better. It is difficult, but I do believe we could be better at informing patients of, quite frankly, the reality of the situation.
Siobhan, is it to respond to what Forbes has asked?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in. I mean, firstly, on the issue of industrial action, because obviously the concerns about the interrelationship between the consultant strike and the junior doctor strike, and the two sort of dates that have already been set. As you've read through the papers, you can sort of see the impact on activity and money, but we've just been talking about safety, and I think we are all really concerned. And I know nationally we were talking with colleagues yesterday, and I know people are working incredibly hard at a national level to find some resolution. But as an ICB, as a system, I just think it's important that we note the real need for some resolution to this issue now, because going into a winter and autumn is just a great concern. To Forbes' point around communication, actually, with Dean and with colleagues from DCH at our elective care group, we had this conversation recently about how could we develop a consistent communication from our acute system around the level of weights. So Forbes, I will take that away with Dean and with Matthew, and we'll work on something through our medical directors that will come out.
Thank you, Tom.
Sometimes our colleagues do need a confidential route through which to speak up. And I met with Charlotte and Alan, who are our new Freedom to Speak Up guardians, and they talked to me and outlined a series of structured interventions to really raise the profile of that Freedom to Speak Up mechanism that they'll be launching through October and December. And I got a real level of assurance that they have got that structured plan and determination that if people do need to speak to us in a confidential way, that we've got the mechanisms and the reinforcement that they can and should do that. So I thought I'd share that, and I know the executive are engaging with them to make sure that everybody has that opportunity should they need it.
And John, was that in your role as the
Freedom to Speak Up guardian around that
champion?
one?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I don't see any more hands then. So thank you again, Patricia, and let's move on to, we haven't got any items for decision today, so we're going to move into the note and assurance and discussion item of the agenda. And we're going to start that with the escalation reports from the committees of the chairs. So the first person I'm going to go to is Jonathan for the Clinical Commissioning Committee.
Thank you. So the main items on our agenda were reviewing the specialised commissioning pre-delegation assessment framework, and we were happy with the way the risks were being looked at. We're going to talk about some issues with the pre-delegation in part 2, but we're happy with the process we're going through and our assessment of the risk and some of the political issues that are leading to that being reviewed. And then we had a paper on the mental health community transformation. We originally brought this in back in May. We asked them to come back to report on the progress. We were generally happy with the progress, but we emphasised that we wanted to see quicker progress, and we urged the executive to get involved and try and help to try and facilitate some of this transformation quicker. Maybe a bit of a COVID approach to getting some of the activities done quicker. I think the last item that we need to note is that we're seeing the risks that we have on our register around SEND possibly increasing. It's being reviewed and likely to come back to this board at the next board meeting in an upgrade, and we think that's a growing risk register. So that's our ability to meet our statutory responsibilities around that. Any questions?
Any questions or comments?
Just reinforce the point about SEND. It's a huge challenge for all of us across the system. We are spending well above the budget that we get. Education, health and care plans, real focus. The delivery of those, both within the NHS and within local government, real struggle. I think last month and the month before, we managed to achieve 0% of our education, health and care plans being produced within the target timescale. And that's a mixture of delays, both within health and within local government. It's not good. We are overspending against our budget. The government has currently allowed us to set aside the debt so it doesn't count. If it did count, we will be bankrupt by the end of this year or sometime in next year, because our outstanding debt payments on SEND is greater than our entire reserves. So it's really dire. We joined the safety valve programme for government. Dorset are already on the safety valve programme. Not sure how successful it is. We will be having conversations, but it's a real challenge for us.
That zero achievement agreement, was that just for BCP or was that BCP?
That's just for BCP. Yeah, but that's because you've got a 20-week timescale to produce them. But actually, the education psychologist, the health relationship, it's really difficult to get an EHCP written in that timescale with all the staff shortages we have.
All right. Doesn't sound like a good note to move on, but so we'll go to Dan, Finance and Performance Committee.
Thanks. I'll take the paper as read, just kind of 2 points drawn to the board's attention. Echoes really from Rob and Patricia's presentation this morning. The committees asked for 4 areas to come back over the next couple of meetings. So PH, personal health commissioning and prescribing, as well as mental health, no criteria to resign, just because we want some more assurance on performance or levers that can be pulled. And so that's not in the board escalation section, because it's to come back to the Finance and Performance Committee. The second comment is kind of just in reference to all of those areas. The committee is working really hard to try and be a system committee, not to replicate a Finance and Performance Committee in a provider, because we don't want to do the same work. We want to work at the system level. And so how it comes back in the conversation will be around impact on both finances, the operational plan, as well as the 5-year plan, because it's really easy to get sucked into shadowing governance of the providers, and we want to operate at the system level. I wasn't going to pull anything else out, Jenny.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Echoes Patricia's comment earlier about attention to performance and transformation. I think we're beginning to see that in the two committees. So finances sort of bearing down heavily on performance, commissioning of government transformation. Beginning to see that tension. It's just an observation.
To you next for the People and Culture Policy.
That's a nice segue, because the one thing that we did approve People and Culture was the People and Culture Committee work plan, which is the calendar of things that we're going to discuss, and that started to come through in that calendar of things we're going to discuss as well. So it was okay, it was good, but it sparked a conversation really about whether the committee is discussing the right things at the right time in terms of transformation and the current state, but other things as well, and whether we're making the best use of our time. So we approved it, but we are getting the new terms of reference in October, Liz, I think, yeah. And so once they're through, what we've also decided to do is run a workshop outside that committee meeting to ask that question about whether this meeting is discussing the right things at the right time in terms of how we discuss it, the content, whether it's anchoring itself adequately to the 5 pillars, and just interrogate really and challenge ourselves about whether that meeting is doing what it should. So I think that's the key point to pull out. But we also had a really good deep dive on equality, diversity and inclusion this time around as well, around the NHS Dorset People Dashboard, and it flagged some areas that we need to focus on and work harder on. So for example, inclusion in recruitment was an area that we really want to pull out, we want to do more work on, so that was a useful conversation, and there are some actions coming through there. And also finally, in the board meeting in January, we talked about better aligning the leading for diversity and inclusion in the Southwest and the ICB plans as well. So we had a good conversation about that. It's worth mentioning we had 2 things coming back. We had the 100 Voices paper coming back, and that was really much better. It gave us more of a broader context, and it was about community conversations rather than numbers of voices and how many people we're going to talk to. The focus was moved away to the broader issue around community conversations and engagement, which felt much better. It was much more focused on outcomes as well. And also the primary care training hub came back. It's getting better, but I think we still need some work on outcomes on that. So there's some baseline data that we need to get, and that was acknowledged in the report, but that report's coming back, I think, in February, and we want to see those improvements incrementally in February again. And if we keep that trajectory of improvement, then we'll start to feel happy with that report.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments for Lisa? The point about thinking about whether or not the committee is doing the right thing, I think is a natural part of the evolution, isn't it? And we think that collectively as committees as a whole anyway. So thank you for that.
Just one more thing in terms of the EDI work. I raised at the national meeting the fact that we're not making a lot of traction nationally on gender identity services, and had a note this morning from Centre around the development of a strategy. So just need you to have that on your radar when we start to broaden out the agenda of ED&I, because we need to think about that.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so Kay for the Primary Care Commission Committee.
I'll take the report as read there. I just want to raise two things as well. Concerns were expressed about how the new commissioning hub, which is hosted by Somerset, is actually functioning. Pharmacy felt that they lacked expertise in some of their areas and they were supporting the commissioning hub in supporting them. And that has been raised now with region because there are monthly meetings with the chairs of primary care committees and the executives within each county, which meet to actually look at how this delegation is going. And that was raised and escalated to them because it is a growing concern that the commissioning hub is not delivering in the way we expected them to. And that's something we're going to have to keep a close eye on going forward. The second point is actually on the GP recovery and access plans. I think this is an unfortunate or unhelpful framing of the issue because certainly in Dorset, GP services have got higher patient contacts than they had pre-COVID. So they're doing very well, actually. So the issue is about increasing demand rather than a recovery of services because they are already above where they were before COVID. And I think it's an unhelpful phrasing to talk about recovery and access. And we need to be aware that that is not where we are in Dorset because we are above what we were delivering pre-COVID. And those are the two key points I just wanted to bring up to the board from the committee.
I think that point actually, Kay, is probably playing out nationally, so I think it's a really good voice out terminology of that. So, any questions or comments for Kay? You talked about escalating concerns around the lead body who's leading on commissioning. Do you know what's happening with that? It sounds like a worry.
Every single chair of all of the other ICBs had the same concerns when we raised it, and so they were going to go back and look at it. And there's some concerns about actually working with Somerset and seeing how that goes.
I'm meeting with the chair tomorrow. Do you want me to raise an issue?
I think it's been raised with the appropriate area. We'll give them some time to see where it goes. I think Jenny, and then we can re-raise it again if there's not any effective action.
Thank you. Rhiannon's not with us, so but Debbie, are you happy to report back on the quality committee?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you. So obviously the report speaks loudly for itself. The committee approved the quality report. We went into it in much more detail than we focused totally on all areas of the quality report and approved that. We approved the safeguarding annual report and the children in care and care experience young people reports, both of which will be published. And we obviously approved in the escalations for the system quality group, which include supervisors going into enhanced quality assurance through NHS England and national concerns. Just to highlight otherwise to the board that we obviously review the corporate risk register in its entirety at quality and safety, although the audit committee, risk and audit committee, owns the corporate risk register. And as a part of that review and of the information that we heard at quality and safety, we decided to escalate the fact that we felt that there should be a risk put onto the corporate risk register related to the impact of out of area placement in relation to mental health. And Dawn Dawson from Dorset Healthcare was happy to support David to actually get the wording right. It's already on the trust risk register anyway, so just to make sure that we captured that. Yeah, I think that was all I needed to.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments for Debbie?
Just a quick comment, which is we really welcome that approach, so thank you very much.
And last but not least, John for the Risk and Audit Committee.
Yeah, thank you. So we met on the 24th of August. Again, I'll take the paper as read. As Debbie just talked about, we did review the risk register. We approved the risk register at the Risk and Audit Committee. Quite a lot of observation, actually, that you mentioned it before. In the NHS, we are managing risk every day. And I think that the quality of insight, understanding, but actually the ability to gather together what are the risks that are within the ICB. I think that has really come forward, and there's a lot of comments about that. We were happy to approve the corporate risk register. We also really noted the redrafting of the risks. That's a really important quality, actually, that the risks do change, and therefore our understanding of the ownership of those risks came out. We approved the data security and protection annual report. That was very important, and we delegated some authority to Stephen, who's got the information risk owner. I just wanted to give a quick update on the update we received on the board assurance framework. We've been looking at the BAF for a number of weeks, and we had a substantial update rather about the development of that board assurance framework. We looked at the direction of travel for that board assurance framework and how it's been redeveloped, aligned with our 5 strategic pillars, and we endorsed that direction of travel, and we'll be receiving our new BAF at our next meeting. So it was a good conversation and good to see the work had really accelerated, I felt, at the last session. Those are the key things I was going to cover.
Thank you very much. So any questions or comments for John? Debbie?
Yeah, just a comment about the risk register. It's going to continue to evolve, obviously, but I guess it's fair to say we've gone a little bit off kilter, but actually our chiefs and our non-executive directors actually prefer it. So we've moved away from the if and we, so, you know, if this is a risk, then, you know, then, and we've just tried to make our risk statements and our risk criteria just really clear and succinct, so that actually we really can read, anyone could read it and know exactly what it's actually saying. So you know, that does move away a little bit from sort of national direction, but I think the most important thing for me is that the risk description is really clear, and we know what we're trying to mitigate against. So I think that's been sort of really well received, and it's made the corporate risk register much more usable, which is what it's not a document that is just there for information. It's a document that we need to be able to use. So hopefully that's yeah, that work will continue. But I think it does look a lot better.
John, Dan, I mean, sorry.
Just to reinforce John's point, but also echo what Debbie said about the risk register, maths can be a real time sucker, sapper sucker. The draft that the Risk and Audit Committee saw was definitely one of the best ones I've ever seen, but really helpful. Debbie just talked about a living document that will be agile and actually add value rather than just sitting on a shelf. And so I suspect an awful lot of work has gone into it, because to have something short and succinct is a lot more work than something long in the post. And so I really just want to endorse what John was saying, because it will really help the committees and the board in terms of assuring where we are against the 5 pillars.
I mean, that detail feedback is really helpful, and actually for me it just points to how mature the team is becoming, the extent that we can get to that, and you know, with the supporters committee. So thank you very much for the work on that. As we said, it's on.
And I will be as well. So I don't have to answer any questions on it anymore.
Okay, so
Natalie's done, actually, you referenced Natalie. She has really, when I talked about that shift, I think Natalie is the individual who is really taking that forward, and we did extend our thanks to her for that clarity of thought. We look forward to getting the final one.
So it sounds like a good point to move to the quality report. So over to you, Debbie.
Thank you. So again, take the report as read, and just sort of highlight anything I feel is important to highlight to the board. Some of it's duplication, so I'm just going to skim over some things that are duplication. So obviously, the first thing I was going to highlight was the CQC ICS assessment pilot, but Patricia's already spoken to that in her report, so I don't need to focus on that. But I will just say that I'm also quite excited about it, and quite, but then we are a bit unique in that respect. But I think it's a real opportunity for us to help the CQC to actually tailor these assessments to be sort of as good as they can be. So it's our opportunity to support that. So we're quite pleased to do that. Local CQC visits, section 2.2, just to highlight the report that sets out that Dorset County Hospital at the end of June obviously had an inspection of the maternity unit. just to let you know that any immediate actions have actually been implemented, and obviously the trust are waiting for the draft report, so we just need to wait for the draft report and then the process that has to go through fact and accuracy and then a formal published report. But I can give assurance that the local maternity and the NHS System Board is overseeing and has assurance around any sort of immediate actions that were recommended at the time of the visit. So just to give you that. With regards to no criteria to reside, I just sort of wanted to highlight, we've talked about no criteria to reside a lot as a board, and we've actually sort of talked about what the impact. It's really difficult to measure the impact actually, but we have had a deep dive at our system quality group that was really helpful from our providers, and everyone is trying to look at it as best we can, it demonstrates the importance of the improvement work we've been doing, and we've still got work to do, as it's already been said, but we are making progress and it is heading in the right direction, which is really important for our patients and our population. So, but we are having a further update in the spring as to sort of how the work that's been agreed is making a difference. We talked about mental health performance already in the board today. I think on the action log it highlighted the concerns we've previously made around dementia diagnosis rates. So we have had a deep dive into this, and a detailed report is going to finance and performance on actions being taken in relation to that. There's a whole section on patient safety and primary care incident reporting and PISA. And I think just really to assure the board that we were required, all NHS provider organisations were required to move from the old serious incident framework to PISA, which is the patient safety incident response framework. I'll give you the full terminology. By the end of September. So I'm pleased to say that all of our providers are actually on track of that. So 2 of them are already gone live, and the other 3 have their robust plans in place to actually transfer over by the end of September or the 1st of November. So really pleased with the work that's been done on that. And lastly, I was just going to say around the shared learning panel in sort of section 3.10 has really sort of grown from strength to strength, I think. We pulled a learning panel together so that we could actually sort of make sure that we're sharing the learning not just across our NHS providers, but also across our independent sector providers, across all of our providers across Dorset, so that we can share the learning when things don't quite go well. And I think sort of that has really moved on strongly. So next time at the board paper, we're going to include a summary of some themes and trends and learning that we've had so far. So that will be in the next quality report for your information. So and I won't say anything about the Beauty Stockholm because Pam's coming to have a discussion later with us about it. So I'll just look over that. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Questions or comments for Steve? Very detailed, so thank you very much. So let's move on to the finance report. To Rob.
Thanks, Jenny. So I think first of all, the way I'm going to try and present this actually is to just recognise that the Finance and Performance Committee, which should give you assurance as a board, is sort of finding its feet, to line up all the right words. It might suggest it didn't know it's not that at all. But it's beginning to feel like a good meeting in terms of really getting into the crux of what some of the issues are now. So that's the first comment I wanted to make. This is the report that went to that Finance and Performance Committee. And we did talk about a few things. So if I start raising things now that we didn't raise in that Finance and Performance Committee, Dan's going to stare daggers at me across the table. So I think it's just worth reinforcing some of the things that we've already heard today in other conversations. So first of all, we cannot ignore industrial action. All sorts of reasons, but of course there's a financial impact on industrial action as well. It impacts the activity that we can get through, and the way the activity is paid for this year is linked to a mechanism by if you do a certain amount of activity, you'll get the money to pay for that activity. It's recognised nationally that the industrial action will affect the ability to achieve that activity. So the activity targets have been adjusted. So our activity target has come down a bit, which means that we are allowed to effectively earn the money a bit easier than we otherwise would have done. But there is not a solution nationally as of yet, looking across the whole year around what that actually means, because there's extra cost as well as loss of income. At the moment, the report tells you that the totality of that is just under £4 million as at month 4, and that number will grow larger as we go through the year. The other thing that we need to highlight.
Because everybody's looking and we can't figure out how it works. Sorry, Rob. It's quite chilly here. Over here. Well, we can swap places then.
Coming out of here.
Oh, it's probably working. Sorry, Rob.
I know it's fine.
You're fine.
PHC. So Dan also talked about not wanting to sort of shadow run what provider organisations, finance performance committees are doing as well. But we have to look at, therefore, the system result, the system position, and also what this organisation is doing as well. And this organisation has a significant cost pressure on personal health commissioning. Patricia's mentioned it was in the AGM review. It's mentioned all the time. It was mentioned in Dan's escalation. So we do have a significant cost pressure on PHC. And one of the asks from the Finance Performance Committee is that our next meeting, we have to come back and explain how we are going to mitigate that risk and find a way of covering off that overspend. The other point, just to pull out the report, was the previous report, we had a brief section on the voluntary sector, just to tell you how much money we spend in the voluntary sector. There's an intention to just start drip feeding information a bit wider than just the NHS control total. So this report does include a table of what we plan to spend with the local authorities through various means, and there's £55 million, plus we have a bit more demand and capacity money as well. We need to get a little bit, sharpen a pencil on the reporting of what that's actually doing, etc., so you can get a better idea of how it's being spent. The final bit that is, it's in the report, but we didn't talk about it much at Finance and Performance Committee, but it's probably worth now just putting, to making the board aware on. It comes back to the way we're paid for doing the activity. As the months go on, things become more, you get more clarity around some of this. And we set an activity target for Dorset, which we have a plan how we're going to do it. And if we achieve the plan, we can bank the money. So as a system, we achieve the activity, we bank the money. If our plan is followed and our NHS providers are therefore doing the activity, the money flows into the NHS providers because they're doing the activity. If, however, the activity is being done by the independent sector providers, and it is mentioned in the report, but there's not a lot on there, that means that we will still receive the same amount of money, but we pass the money across to the independent sector because they've earned it. It's their right. That's absolutely fine. But what it means is we haven't passed the money to our providers who still have the costs. So what that actually means is that we're just beginning to see, and we need to explore it more, that we're potentially getting a cost pressure because we've got the costs for our staff, but the activity is shifting a bit into the independent sector. We have to pass the money to the independent sector, so we're left with the cost pressure in our control total. So it's a little bit technical, and we'll come back with more detail at the next Finance and Performance Committee, but that is just beginning to now become an issue that's raising itself.
Okay. You've got a really good style of explaining complex things in a way that we can understand. So thank you.
You got in the middle.
So any questions or thoughts? Okay. Siobhan.
You might expect me to say this, Rob. That technicality could have quite a large impact. Obviously not just on acute NHS providers, but on the ICB rating. There's there's a knock-on impact of that technicality, which we will all work through.
Yeah, and Siobhan, I was talking to your finance director, Pete, this morning on the way in about it as well. So we're absolutely clocking it, and we need to work through what that means. So yes, that.
Okay, I don't see any more hands, so I'm going to suggest that we break now. We come back at 12:15 as we're timetabled to do. I don't know if somebody can try to sort out the aircon while we're on a break. It's getting cooler.
It's only because the flow is from these two, and if you're in the far extremities, the flow doesn't work so well in the room.
You might just have to freeze it.
Items like if you're cold, come on.
Well, round.
Got the performance reports now. That's where we're at. Ashley, are you doing that on behalf of the Dean's here?
That was a scared face then.
Okay, so Dean, shall we hand over to you then?
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. So performance report, this is really focusing on where we are with our operating plan standards. So I think as Dan mentioned earlier, we had 2 deep dives at the Finance and Performance Committee this time. The first one on mental health, and that's because we are behind our trajectory in 5 out of the 6 standards that are in the operating standard. And kind of we know that one of those is going to recover kind of from the work that we've done, but we'll get enough people referred into the perinatal service from actions that we've already taken. But the other 4, we needed further assurance that we would get back into to deliver these standards by the end of the year. I think the one that was causing the most concern was the out of area placements, where patients needing mental health services are treated at a distance where they're not close to their normal support mechanisms. So there's a quality of care there as well as just the performance standard that we're looking at. Second one that we looked at was no criteria to reside. As I've reported previously, we did well from April through to the end of May when we introduced our new discharge pathway and discharge to assess, and we brought our no criteria to reside numbers down quite markedly to where we expected to be by the end of June. It has gone up a bit since then. We are higher than the Southwest average, which is 17% at the moment, and in Dorset we're about 22% of beds have patients who should be discharged from hospital. So there's 4 things that we're particularly working on there, is making sure that our discharge to assess pathways are as good as they can be, so patients flow through those to enable new patients to come into those. Using the commissioned intermediate care services that we've got to the best, so that we're not having to design new packages of care for people as they come out of hospital. And we're using to good effect and spreading the use of the multi-agency discharge events that are in place, both in the mental health setting now and as well as the acute setting. And the 4th area is the targeted work that we're doing with University Hospitals Dorset, since the way the data was collected was changed, and through the health of the ward system. So we're working through that now because it's shown some new challenges that we've got. The other things that's on my watch list that are of some concern, but not as much as the 2 that I've just mentioned. So long waiting patients. We should be seeing everybody within 78 weeks of the initial referral. At the end of September, we're expecting that to be 22 patients, and these are ones that are at risk of breaching due to industrial action. So I'm hoping that number will reduce by the time we get to the end of this month, but they're the ones that we're watching. 65 weeks is where we should be by the end of the year. We have fallen a bit behind our expected position for the end of August, largely due to the industrial action that has been taking place. So we're just kind of watching that and looking at what our recovery plan is going to be for it. We've also got a high number of patients who don't need to be admitted for treatment but need an outpatient appointment for it. We've got relatively high rates of those who've not been given a date, which kind of we're flagging regionally on that. In diagnostics, this is one of our good areas. But we've got 2 areas where we've got particular challenges at the moment. So this is where we should be offering an appointment within 6 weeks, and kind of 70% of all patients waiting over 6 weeks are in 2 areas, one for audiology appointments and the other for echocardiograms. We've agreed a recovery plan for audiology with Dorset Healthcare, who provide the service. They've got a new information system, so we're just waiting for the numbers to come out of that to have the latest position on it, because we haven't had that for a few weeks. And the echocardiogram service, we expect that should be down to a maximum wait of 6 weeks by the end of September. For the recovery plan that's in place is working and working well. Cancer, we have seen kind of strong performance in this. Kind of the faster diagnosis is standard. This is where patients should be given a decision whether it's a cancer diagnosis or not within 28 days. It does appear to have deteriorated in August. We have been kind of leading the way with this up until that point. So we're investigating kind of why that is so low and what we can do about it. And the final area that we're really watching at the moment is the use of virtual wards. We've got 126 virtual ward beds in place of the 200 that were expected, so we're a bit behind that. And we need those in place before we get to the winter, because that's part of our plan of how we're going to provide as good services as we can during the winter. So they're my areas of concern from the performance report. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you very much, Dean. Really detailed. Thank you for that. Questions and comments for Dean?
Not really a question, just a comment. Just to on the back of the previous discussions we've obviously had around Lucy Letbury and neonatals, I think it's just a good point to note the data in section 3.10 around our neonatal mortality and the performance of our providers in reducing mortality, also reducing brain injury in neonates, and we've got some good figures. We're doing well compared to the national standard, and also well below the target.
Oh, apparently they can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you down here, Debbie. I don't know whether it's because you're facing that way, but could you speak a bit? Especially for
Sorry, I was just pointing you to the direction of section 2.10 of the report, just to highlight the data for neonatal mortality, because I think it's quite pertinent to just point you in that direction in view of the Lucy Letbury discussion we previously had, and we can never sit on our laurels, and we're trying to improve, but we're actually doing well in Dorset. So.
Okay, Siobhan.
Just as chair of the elective care oversight group, I just sort of say, you may sense that the mood is a little bit low in the group, but however, it's not. So just as a Dorset elective care oversight group, I just say there's a real attitude of getting on with the things that are within our control. And I think that is just really important at the moment. And I just think the teams from DCH and UHD and DHC in that group have shown a real, take a deep breath, let's get on with what we can do. And also we've got an elective care workshop at the end of the month that I just think it's good for the board to know, which is sort of looking longer term. So almost to the point we made at the beginning of the week, our roles are to deal with the now, but also to look forward. And we will be doing that in elective care and cancer care, which I think is a positive.
Somebody else put their hand up. I can't remember who it was, but Cecilia, I'll go to you next, and then Jonathan.
I was just wondering about the virtual beds. I didn't quite understand why we're stuck at 126. So it'd be interesting if you could explain that. But I also wanted to note that in 2.3 there is a comment that we've actually been able to recruit 17 full-time theatre staff, which I just think is absolutely amazing under the circumstances. So whoever was in charge of doing that, just well done.
Thanks. Do you want to come back in on the virtual ward beds? Kind of one of the reasons why we've stuck there, and kind of, David, you might know more because I think this was coming to INCOG.
Can I just hold you a minute?
Oh, sorry.
Jonathan's question is also about virtual boards, so we might as well take that as well.
Yeah, so my question was about, there's a line here about clinical competence and risk adversity around virtual wards. I wondered if you could expand on that and what impact that's having on their utilisation.
Yeah, I think it's a similar issue for the two. So the remote monitoring, so we are behind because there are an additional 60 remote monitored beds that are coming into place, which is getting the numbers up that we're looking to have. The clinical confidence around it was the clinical governance around how we're using remote monitoring, which has held up us implementing additional beds, and that's now been resolved. But we're now a bit behind the curve on people kind of being confident in using those beds with the remote monitoring that's in place, and there's work going on with the consultant teams who are due to use those beds to increase that confidence in the remote monitoring of the beds.
Yeah, sure.
So sorry to jump in, just to add to what Dean said. So that is absolutely the challenge in Dorset, but it's not unique to Dorset as well. It's up and down the country about this cultural shift that we need to help. And as part of that, Southwest England, NHS England Southwest are running some virtual ward accelerator events at the end of this month, which our teams and clinical teams are taking part in as well. So that's going to really help that expectation, the best practice, the culture shift that we need to go through as well. So we're quietly confident that this will, having gone through this phase, there will be an acceleration of delivery of this over the next quarter.
Thank you. And sorry, it was Patricia that I overlooked, and then I'll take Matthew. Sorry.
Just relating to virtual wards, there was a question for me around, given that DCH have been running acute hospital at home for a long time and had a clinical confidence issue right at the beginning, have we thought about those clinicians speaking to other clinicians, because obviously they've been doing it for 10 years plus?
Yeah, definitely.
And then my other points were about the actual report, in that one, providers are required to introduce the health inequalities and ethnic minority lens to their waiting list reporting and reporting against the planned care standards for 65 weeks, and have been for quite a long time. So can we think about how we might introduce that detail into our report, because we should be, to try and offer equity of access. And then my second point was just referring back to the national conversation about patient safety, but also the conversation we've had before about the fact that whilst access is important, what is really important is, if you are delayed in terms of those standards, what is the impact on your overall health and prognosis? So it's complicated, but can we start to think about how we sort of triangulate some of that in the narrative of the report? Because, if we think about cancer, what people really want to understand is, if they don't hit the national target, is that going to change their prognosis? And we need to start to think about how we build that into the report, so we're all clear on the consequences in terms of harm, if not, of not achieving access standards.
Okay. Matthew.
Thank you. So three points. So I spent some time with somebody who works in one of the virtual wards, actually in the BCP area the other day, and was hearing about the success of the model. But one of the messages is they've got more capacity than is being used. So I don't know if Forbes is still on the call, but I think there's a bit of an appeal to GPs and clearly conversations outside of this board, but to see whether we can appropriately divert more patients at source, so they're going into the virtual wards rather than into an acute environment. So that's one point. Second point on cancer, Dean, you might be able to describe this better than me, and please correct me if my figures are wrong. But I think alongside the challenges that you set out for cancer, it's important as a sort of summary message, whilst recognising those challenges and the delays we've got are too long, that more patients than ever before, or more patients than before COVID, are being referred within the Dorset system. I think we're running at about 120%. And I think we're seeing more patients and treating more patients than ever before. So it's about 108, 110%. So that's a really, really important message in terms of the delivery of care. And then thirdly, I just wanted to say something briefly about out of area placements. And we had this discussion in more detail at the Finance and Performance Committee. But this is a really significant issue. And from my point of view, in terms of mental health services, alongside, I think, waiting times for children and young people, it's it's one of the big two patient quality and experience risks that we face in Dorset healthcare. There's lots of work going on focused on this, and just to give people an indication of sort of where we are in terms of today. Today, excluding the additional facility that we've commissioned in Southampton, there are about 19 people who are receiving care outside of Dorset. So that's a really high number, and it's far too big. We are working to make sure that those people are supported and can be brought back into Dorset as quickly as possible. But we are also seeing a big increase in referrals. So the referrals are running at about 16% above what they were 12 months ago. We have had quite a big waiting list of people who need to come in for mental health care, and those numbers have come down a bit. So today, actually, there's nobody waiting with our community mental health teams. There's one individual in UHD and one individual in Dorset County, so those numbers have improved. But we've talked about no criteria to reside. We've also got some delays in mental health settings, so there are about 17 people where the health and social care teams have jointly agreed that they're ready to leave those settings. So we really need a focus on progressing the care for those 17 individuals. I think for the Dorset system, we may have a systemic problem in terms of our capacity not matching demand. When you look at our benchmarking, we've got low numbers of beds per head of population. The acuity of the people we admit is high, and at least on some measures, our length of stay is controlled. The strategic change in the development of the MHIC services, the out-of-hospital services to provide people with as much preventative care as possible, will be one of the solutions to that. But we may need to look at the number of beds in the system. And we are also going to get an external view of our practices around flow to see if there's anything that we're missing within the Dorset system. So I just wanted to give that flavour to the board today, because this is a really significant issue.
Really helpful. Thank you very much, Matthew. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up what you were saying there, Matthew, because at clinical commissioning, there was a push, and Jonathan reported on, to try and get greater pace into the development of MHIC. How has that been received, and is there a sense that we can move a bit faster on that, and we can up the pace a bit?
Yeah, I mean, David, should we do a double act in responding to that? So from the Dorset healthcare point of view, and indeed some of the other partners we are working with in terms of the VCSE, we want to go as quickly as possible. Clearly, limiting factors will be about people and finding the workforce, but our teams are really keen to make progress, and I know that that's a shared view and is being really supported by the ICB leadership.
Yeah, and I can add, so there was some particular things that we discussed in clinical commissioning committee, some area of procurement, and all those timelines have been tightened up. So we will see some delivery in this business year. And then there was some work going on, conversations I had last week about trying to see what we could deliver this side of Christmas in the build up to the winter pressures. Not necessarily winter pressures in mental health services, because there's a steady high demand, but the impact on the rest of the system through delays in movement. And actually, I shouldn't say this because in confidence, Ash and I, just in the corridor there, we're having a chat about how we might yet still further put some additional support into this program, because it's one of our big transformation programs that we have to pay attention to. So there's those conversations going on. We didn't resolve it, Ash and I, but we certainly had a conversation about it. So it's still very live for us, and we're putting effort and energy behind it.
Okay, so thank you. Clearly lots of energy going into that, and we're keep up to speed on that. I'm going to move us on to look at the state strategy that Rob's leading on, and I think you're being joined by Michael online to support.
Yes, I see. I'm all right just to introduce this, and I'll leave Michael to go through a bit more detail. So we are required to do an ICS estate strategy. Michael works for me. Michael, he's got the joy of having capital and estate in his job title. So clearly he's quite busy on this. I think I need to, it's very slightly disappointing when the words expectation management come out at the start of the presentation. However, there is something around expectation management around an ICS estate strategy. The reason I say that is because we've talked around key worker housing. There are lots of things around estate, big things around estate. We also need to get the foundations right. So there's something around just starting on something and then bringing it together. So Michael's going to talk about where we're starting in phase one. And then if it's okay, what we'd like to do is we've sort of just got some arrows in the back, and there is an important, probably more important piece of the phase two, phase three stuff where we want to be widening it into those things that you'll probably be all excited about, wanting to talk about how we're going to do it. So if that's okay, if I hand it over to Michael, he'd explain how we want to move into phase two and phase three. And then if we could just open up, just to hear people's comments and thoughts would just be really helpful so we can shape what it looks like in the future. Is that okay? Is that all right, Michael? Oh, final bit. The only bit I think in the paper that's changed since the paper was written was clearly because of all the cost pressures we've got. We're trying to do this in as an efficient way with money as possible. So there is money available through some other schemes that we've been trying to utilise to do this. It's with region, and they're looking to make sure, because it was a region decision, and they're very supportive of it. We were hoping that all of it would be covered by that amount of money. They might come back to ask us for quite a small contribution, but we don't know that as of today. So I think the paper's correct in the fact that the majority of this is going to be covered through money that the region can hold on our behalf, and they effectively have to sign it off, and they're supportive of it, but we just need to get that piece over the line. Okay?
Is that in that first section?
I think in there, I think it's
your chart earlier.
Funding,
yeah.
But actually, region have come back and they said they might ask for a small contribution. I don't know what that looks like yet, but it won't be an issue for the board. You know, we're not talking hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Okay, Michael then.
Okay, thank you very much. So, as Rob's introduced, the paper just summarises the work for the first stage of developing the ICS estate strategy, which is a requirement. Having said that, we haven't yet had the detailed guidance from NHS England about exactly what that requirement is. We have been working to a timescale of publishing the first phase of this in December, which is all we've been told. Given the delays in publishing the guidance, that may slip, but that's what we're still currently aiming towards. So the work will build on the strategies of the individual trusts and the ICB to produce an up-to-date strategy that supports the wider system priorities. The first step is that we will update and complete a stock take of the estate across the NHS and general practice to make sure we're got an accurate record of the available estate, the condition, the occupancy, ownership, and the issues arising from that. That's fairly straightforward, and we're in a pretty strong position as a system to complete that, with a lot of the data is already there. We'll then, and alongside that, be doing the second step, which in my view is the key output from this phase of the work, which is to develop and agree essentially a decision-making framework for how we will develop and utilise the system estate going forwards. What we're absolutely not expecting to do is in December say, over the next 5 and 10 years, we will have a estate that looks like X, Y, Z with buildings here, there, but what we will have is a mechanism for making decisions in the future about where those estates need to be developed and changed use of, and also to make some decisions around some short-term use as and when those opportunities arise. So that for me is the key part of what we'll develop initially. The final stage of the first phase of the work is actually to produce the document that both meets the requirements for NHS England once we know them, but is actually a useful and dynamic document that we can use within the system to manage our estate strategy and use it to support delivery of our operational priorities and clinical objectives. We will be forming a steering group to oversee the work. We're going to invite members from the trusts and from general practice to support that and give the oversight in the first stage. And then, as Rob's alluded to, the next part of the work is to expand this out to be wider than just essentially the NHS and to start to engage with the wider ICS partners around how we can have a more comprehensive and cohesive strategy across the whole system. So I'll stop there and back to Rob or questions.
Sorry, Rob, did you want to come back in before we go to questions? Because I've got quite a lot of hands up.
On the way up, if I should come in first, go on, Patricia.
How do you know Patricia's there? She is.
The question in my mind is, well, what's going through my mind is, I don't think we can do the NHS one without understanding what's happening in the wider system. So I think we're taking this in 2 steps when actually they're interconnected to each other. We've had a conversation over the last few months on and off about what do we think about a one public estate. And if we just think about the conversation we were having this morning at Dorset Chief Execs about how we support the development of the work that we're doing in Portland as an example, the corporate around supporting that community to thrive. A big conversation is how do we and local government work together on the infrastructure. So I don't think we can do one without doing the other, that they are intimately connected to each other.
I've got a funny feeling there might be a theme to all these hands, but I've got Dan next, and then John, and then Kay, and then Matthew, and I've got a comment to make as well.
Sorry to make a similar point, but it kind of builds on Patricia's point. I really welcome the paper and the sequencing and the clarity and the pragmatism. So kind of you did manage expectations, Rob. The bit that the bit that I just kind of, it felt like it was about NHSE compliance and reading the paper. If that's where we need to start, kind of fair dues. But when we jump into this work, I want to see more on the 5 pillars, no criteria to reside, out of community mental health. So what are the drivers and what are the risks that we're adopting? And I think we need to know those at the start, even if we sequence in a way that kind of starts small and builds out. So it's a really similar point, but I just think the context of what the 5-year forward plan and what the risks that you've heard as a theme today, there wasn't quite enough of that in there for me. And then the other bit that I think we should think about early doors is performance and measurement, and I just couldn't see anything on that. So a really similar step, similar point to Patricia.
Echoes. So the words I had were, this is inside out, what's the outside in piece, and particularly how will services develop through time, think about different needs and different requirements. So that was the first point. I think the second one is really an assurance point, which is, can we develop the artifacts and the processes that capture this such that we can have a sustainable estate structure in the future? I can't help but think about concrete, in an environment at the minute. I don't know if we could go and look at an inventory that talks about our fabric today. So I think as part of that baselining, I do think it's really important that we think about the sustainable artifacts, where they're held and who's accountable for reviewing those as we go through.
I welcome the stock take of GP services and their estates, because clearly there's a considerable number of issues there which have been allowed to fester over the years. I'm not thinking about RAC, but a number of I agree with Patricia that it should be a wider ICS system. But I think when we're thinking about, you talked about general practice, but really we should be thinking about primary care in its widest sense. If general practice is going to be more sustainable going forward, we need to bring in pharmacies to do what they can do. And one of the key issues that's preventing pharmacies from doing that is estate. They don't have the facilities. And a number of those pharmacies are obviously hosted in medical centres or close to medical centres or in relation with them. And I think it's important that we look at whether the services that pharmacy can offer to the system is also taken into account when we're looking at estates. Because if they don't have the room to do what we want them to do, then the whole thing will fall apart at the first hurdle.
Matthew.
Thank you. So same point. So I won't repeat exactly, but more precisely, therefore, I wonder coming out of this whether there's something about developing an ambition for what we want our estate to be. And this goes well into the territory of Graham and Spencer. But there's something about our ambition being about health that's wider than healthcare. And it's almost, this isn't a very good stat line, but it's almost an estate strategy without walls. I think there's lots here about the sustainability of primary care, about key worker housing, but it's also about how our population is going to change in terms of supported housing, and really importantly, I believe, in terms of achieving our ambitions around inequalities. So if we think of the pillar around the three most deprived areas, what are we going to do together about estate and infrastructure, whether that's Portland and looking at the future of primary care and community health provision on Portland, the lack of a care home facility on Portland, or whether that's about work in Boscombe and some of the deprived areas in BCP.
So, Rob, I think it was good to talk about managing our expectations as you started. But I think that and I'm going to call it a brief, it wasn't a brief. I think what we've got is damping down the expectations, the ambitions that the board set out some time ago around looking at our assets across the system to see how we can bring those together for the best of Dorset and also our people that work in it. And so, of course, you're going to have to look at NHS infrastructure, but actually the whole point of an ICB and the request that we had was that we are looking at the system as a whole. The second thing that I wanted to pick up, and I'm not going to replicate the comments that have already been made, but I'm not sure how we can get to developing the mechanisms, which I understood from Michael as the first stage, without actually setting down the principles and the wider picture. It feels a bit back to front to me. So anyway, so that was my comment. Spencer, you trying to come in?
Yeah, I did, because one of the things I'm very clear about in the council that I'm the leader of is outcomes, and I don't see, and I think I respect the way you're going to approach the issue. Well, what are the outcomes? Is it location? What are the provision requirements? It's that big strategy, and then you underpin it with how you're going to go about achieving it. And I don't quite see that in here. And we're doing a huge piece of work. I'm sure Graham will be doing the same thing in BCP on our estate. We've got far more estate than we need. We need to find out where we need it, and what we don't need, we either repurpose or we dispose. And I think that's a big piece of work. And please, I'm be more than happy for that conversation to be taking place between the ICS and Dorset Council. I'm sure that'll be the same BCP, because there will be stuff estate we've got that we don't need. Health might need it, and then there's ways in which we can make the best use of the broader public estate, in my view.
I think that's right, and that's where my head is, and I think we need to think about it. First of all, thank you for laying it down, Michael, because actually in the past we haven't done enough on joined up estate planning, so I think it's a really good first step. And getting to a point where we've got a decision-making framework, how we prioritise things is brilliant, because we haven't always had that before, and which is why we've had lots of disagreements about decisions that were made. But I think we need to think about how we wrote the 5-year forward plan, where we didn't write the documents to satisfy our regulator. We wrote the document because it was the right thing for our communities, and then we gave the regulator what they needed out of that as a subset. And this is the approach we should take on the estate strategy. Spencer's absolutely right. What is it we're trying to achieve by coming together on estates work to serve the integrated strategy we've all agreed and do the right thing? And out of that should come a stock take for our NHS estate, but actually the whole purpose of the strategy should be much broader than that, as Matthew says, around how we're going to use our estate to support the health and well-being of our community. And we need to come at it from that perspective. And then what we need for NHS single will drop out.
Just before I go to Graham and John, Julian at the national meeting yesterday actually was encouraging systems to look to local government, their local government partners around capital and estate, because you have more flexibilities than we do. So I'm not sure the centre would disapprove of what we've put in, even if we went back with something broader. So then I've got Graham and John, and Patricia's already
So
gone.
one was starting with I'm supporting Spencer's comment, and just issue about timescale. So we've had a change of administration, change of direction. We were trying to develop our own estate into something profitable. The new administration basically saying we just want to get it used. So the big opportunities, Paul Civic Centre, Christchurch Civic Offices, we need to get a resolution in the next 6 months, which will either be offload and get somebody else to develop, or do we do something in partnership? I was talking to Siobhan about Wessex Fields and the potential around that. So I think the timing is sort of over the next 3 to 6 months for us. We're going to be bringing forward some proposals to move our estate as quickly as we can into other productive uses. So if we can have that conversation, it might be just absolutely, let's rule that out. We'd never want that sort of site. That's fine. It'd be useful to have that. I don't think we've enabled those conversations so far. And I think we are now enabling those conversations. That'd be good to happen if we can.
I suppose it's just an observation, and it's borne out what you're saying there, Graham, but the different agendas, the fact this is NHSE driven to some extent, is pressure on the NHS part. That there's a complexity there about a risk perhaps in the sharing that means that people depend on something that may be not dependable in creating a joint strategy if there is a need, financial pressure or political pressure to do something with estate with any particular part of the integrated system, that is obviously going to be a risk factor to other parts of that system. And just kind of an observation that it's something that's challenging this process, which I think is an illustration of how it challenges the kind of wider integration that we're seeking as well. It's just something to spot.
A chink of light, I suppose. We've already partnered with the NHS Confederation about the new way that we've been utilising the estate today. We've got really good exemplars. We've worked really well with Dorset Council and Suffolk's House. So that's an example of community working estates together. We've worked really well with BCP in the community and Legal and General and Paul Centre, and we're looking at Boscombe, done some great work there. We're published all round, and we won the HSJ Estates Optimisation National Award this year. So we've got the real sort of positive, there's a real sense in the room about we're already thinking differently, and all these things also I've been working with the community. The community health hubs are being designed in the communities and are bringing services together, so really utilising, and I think there's a great opportunity. And I know that Michael's already brought our team in because he mentioned a bit about the 5-year forward plan, and those pillars must be key in this document. So I think there's a way we can reshape to bring this in, whilst at the same time I know we sometimes have to, I hate the word tick box, but sometimes we have to deliver something that will meet the requirement for the national regional team, but making sure it meets the needs of our people. And I think we can work together really well. And I know Michael's already brought us, you've already brought us into those conversations. You just didn't say it, but I know you have. So he's putting us, all of us, front and centre. I just thought it was worth. We've done some great stuff already. We just need to build upon that foundation with our communities and people.
So, Michael, Rob, you've heard all of the comments around the room. I don't know if you want to respond now or just take those back and reflect on them.
No, so Mark, shall I go?
Yes. Yes.
So I could be facetious, so you weren't listening at the start of my explanation, but I won't do that. But this is just there is something about, unfortunately, and I apologise to our partners, but there's an NHSE compliance thing of not a lot of time to get something done, to get a starting point in. So that's a job of work in itself. Everything else that you said, of course, and it's really good to hear it, because now, you hear it, it's great to hear it from the board. And if I'm trying to simplify this, it's like, okay, so we had an arrow that said phase 1. Well, actually, we've got to do that anyway. So it's not even for discussion. We've got to do that, right? Because that's the foundations. But rather than phase 2, just feel like phase 2 has to come in and start phase 1 as well. Actually, you do this in parallel at the same time. So not only are you doing this, you're also starting that other work. The bit we just have to be mindful of as a board is that if you really think about a building and how a building can be used, you'll need to know what services or what use you want for it. I don't think we can answer that yet. We haven't got the clinical strategy. We haven't got the green, the sustainability strategy and things like that. So I hear everything that everyone's said, but by December we will not be in a place where we would have all that box and box. It's not to say we can't start engaging and having those conversations. I agree about the ambition thing. That starts everything, doesn't it? And that's why it's good to have this conversation. Let's set the ambition. Let's say how we're going to do it. This piece of work is framed that it will then, in the absence of a lot of that, be able to just fit into it. That's why it's about how we make decisions and things like that. but there is also a job of work to do. So everything that everyone said, I'm not disagreeing with a single word of it. And it's really good. So Graham, it's nice to hear the imperative as well. Yeah. And it kind of gives you a remit just to get on with some of this stuff. Well, whereas we thought we could start in post-December, let's start it now on some of that stuff. So I'm fine with all of it, and it's useful to hear it.
Okay, I'm the comments have been made. I think what you've heard is a real consistency around the room. So I'm going to leave Patricia to work with you and the wider team and your team, Rob, to just think about how we bring this into being. Otherwise, there's a danger that we just start going around the discussion again. So I'm just going to close it there. All right, so then that takes us on to the Portland Barge update. And I think Pam, yep, Pam is there. Over to you, Pam. Debbie, did you want to come on this, actually?
No, Pam's fine.
Thank you, Jenny, and good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Pam O'Shea. I'm the Deputy Chief Nursing Officer for the ICB. So I was asked to do a short update on the health provision for the residents on the barge as presented, and I will apologise in advance. I've just noticed a typo error on the front page, which should have said the Home Office have relocated. For those of you who've been in a dark cave somewhere, well done. Otherwise, you'll be well aware that although we had secured, and we have and continue to secure GP primary care provision, following embarkation, within a matter of days, obviously, the Home Office, in consultation with the UK Health Security Agency and other partners, took the decision to relocate the residents elsewhere, following Legionella being found in the water. And at the current position is those individuals are still relocated elsewhere. Our commissioned health provider, which is South Coast Medical Group, who are already providing services to our asylum seekers in the hotels in the BCP area, continues to support those individuals as well. And we are waiting further updates really in terms of the regulatory action that's taking place prior to the Home Office taking a decision to repatriate people back to the barge. So that's the current position as it stands. Thank you.
Okay, so I suspect, as Pam says, everybody's been following this. I certainly was from abroad, so Debbie, and then Graham.
Just one comment from me. I do think that we really need to thank the GP practice that are actually supporting this. And I'm just wondering whether we might make a decision in the board to do that in writing formally, because they really, really have to, not just to actually support all of the work when obviously the residents will be moved into the barge, but to actually then embrace the move and to take that on board and to continue to actually provide that health resource out of area. I think that they've done great, and I just think maybe we might want to think about acknowledging that, to be honest.
Yep, Graham?
I just wonder whether we should bring a report to this board on the health support for asylum seekers overall, given we've got 719 are currently in the Bournemouth area, maximum capacity of 976. And I don't think we've ever reported here on the overall health support to them.
Sure, really good. Cool.
Practice.
But I think there's agreement on both of those questions from the board, are there?
Yeah, because the practice that is supported in Portland is the same practice the hotels in.
Yeah.
And we could do anything.
Just leading on from that, if appropriate at some stage, just thinking back to the patient story section, it would be great to hear a sort of patient and colleague story to really bring this to life alongside a written report.
Maybe we can work with local government to do that. So that would be really helpful, I think. Okay, well, thank you very much, Pam. You've got a couple of comments, no questions, so you're let off lightly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then that takes us to Graham, you're next, I think, with the Bournemouth Christchurch and Poole Council Vision, Priorities and Objectives consultation.
I'll just try and share screen. Does that come up? Yep.
Yeah.
You can see that it's come up. I'll do this really as quickly as I can. So you know that the council changed administration in May. We've been talking about where we are, and we're out to consultation at the moment on our proposed vision. So I want to try and, not necessarily have a discussion today, but certainly try and stimulate some views to come into that to help us. Little bit of context. So that's how our budget is spent. If you take the purple, the light blue and the green, that's effectively social care. So about 309 million, 200 million or so of it goes on social care. In this orange includes our use of 30 million reserves, most of which also goes into those areas as well. So, you know, at least 2/3 of our budget goes on social care of some sort or other. So it's worth just starting that context, because I would argue that most people vote on the on the orange operations bit, which is the orange bit, which is how we'll keep the streets clean, do we fill the potholes and does the traffic move, etc. Actually, probably at least 2/3 of our money goes on things that people don't tend to vote on. And this is just a very high-level summary of our expenditure split between those directorates and our pressures in future years. And what you can see for next year is that we've got a £44 million funding gap forecast on a £320 million net budget. And the reason for that is for the last 3 years, we've been putting 30 million a year of reserves in to support our budget. And that comes out because we don't have any reserves left. And our council tax has gone up by 5%, but inflation's running at 10. 10% minus 5% is a 5% gap on 320 million, that's 15 million. So 15 million plus the 30 million we're not doing reserves, 45 million. No real surprise, that's the gap that we're looking at. So we're under real pressure. What the members want to do is they want to talk to people about what our priorities should be, and then try and reflect that in the budget settings. That's why I use that as a bit of context. But what we had, in 2019, after the first election, we produced a corporate strategy, which was a bit on the right. We changed administration after 18 months, incoming Conservative administration. They kept the corporate strategy in place, but also produced the big plan. So we've been working for the last 2.5 years with two documents that don't really sit together. One was much more community-based, vibrant communities with an outstanding quality of life where everybody plays an active role. The other was how do you rejuvenate Paul, act of scale, do world-class, iconic development. So that's been a bit of a tension within the council, which as partners you may have seen. What we have to do is merge them together into one document. Okay, so that's the ambition, but it won't look like that. So we sat down in June with the new administration, looked at all the priorities, looked at the objectives, and what we've said is actually a new vision, where nature, coast, communities and towns come together to create a healthy and sustainable environment. Actually, that feels like BCP. Vibrant communities with an outstanding quality of life could have been anywhere. This feels like, what we're trying to do is to create somewhere that feels like the place that we're managing. And I think that's probably a more accurate reflection. So where nature, coast, communities and towns come together to create a healthy and sustainable environment. So that's the vision and that's the overriding priority. We've then really got two things that we do. One is we manage people and communities and support them, and the other is place and environment. So what we've put out is, so I'll jump onto these two first. So some key objectives around people and communities, which are out for consultation. So they are out to get comment. Are they in the right sort of wording? Are they in the right sort of order? So particularly looking at the most vulnerable, promoting quality of life, making sure that people are as active as they can be, leading active and independent lives. Skills and development, which is clearly key to employment. Housing is an absolute priority for us. We have one of the highest ratios in the country between house prices and wages, which means that people can't get on the housing ladder. One of the things I always quote is that if somebody will pay £450,000 for a 12-by-8 wooden beach hut on Motherford Spit, how much will they pay for a one-bedroom flat that happens to have an ocean view, and therefore local people get priced out there? The affordable market is not really affordable. The real challenge for us around housing. Safety is clearly an issue. We've seen rising levels of things like knife crime in the town centre. We are seeing London crime effectively coming down to the south coast, and that's changing where people feel. And then actually for us, it's about engaging with local communities rather than us providing for local communities. So a real shift, and that's where some of the budget savings are going to come. Cultural identity and diverse heritage. The diversity is changing probably more rapidly now than it has in the last decade. And we're seeing a real shift in the population. We forecast that over the next 10 years. So how are we preparing for that? And then working with partners to reduce the impact of cost of living. So those are people and community bits. As a group, you're probably less interested in the place and environment, other than, of course, it's where many of you live and work. So I won't go through all of these, but it is about looking at infrastructure. How does that work? How do we encourage people to travel more actively? Looking at high streets, which are clearly struggling at the moment, and then Bournemouth Town Centre would say, Bournemouth's really struggling. You've been to Poole? It's actually, Poole's not doing badly. And there was an article in the Sunday Times about how that has really come on, primarily because Legal & General, who run the shopping centre, have bought in the health centre. We've moved our customer contact centre into build onto the library. There's a new employment centre, and we've got all of our adult learning now has moved into there. That creates footfall, which means it's a vibrant centre. So we're seeing difference between Poole and Bournemouth really struggling. Just really look at town centres. And then environment, clearly key. And, the phrase of we leave only footprints, I quite like, because that's what we want everybody to do. And also trying to value the environment in which we live and work. And underpinning this, 19% of our area is triple SIs, sites of special scientific interest. So a fifth of the area is a triple SI. That's a pretty outstanding fact for somewhere that is primarily urban. So it's quite a real balance between the urban living and that fantastic environment. So those are the two lists that are out there for feedback. We've also put in a list about how we work together and how we work as a council. So you may recognise the difference in approach with the new administration. I will just focus on the new administration. They want to be open, they want to be transparent, they want to be accountable, they want to put people at the heart of it. So you'll see a difference, things like the civic centres, rather than us developing it ourselves for value, we want to make sure we get the right community value in there and get use of those things. So we're seeing a different approach to that. So that's sort of wrapped up in that slide. I won't go through the slide there, but that's sort of the internal looking one. Inclusive and open and working with partners being emphasised. So that's what we're putting out there. It's gone out in a form, it's online, it's available as a leaflet. We're doing drop-ins in libraries and in the shopping centres, and then aiming to bring that back during September. So that was our original plan. We're now at September to come back to the Cabinet in December with a new strategy for that to then support the budget discussions during January and February. What I'd really like is for you all to take part in that and give us some feedback and give us some views. Is the balance right? Does it feel like we've got the right emphasis? What I'm trying to avoid is saying that everything is a priority. And what I am saying is if it's not mentioned in there, it's not a priority. Got to say £44 million, that's where I'm going to look first. So we're trying to get that feel. So that's what we're trying to do. And I just wanted to have the opportunity to put that out there with the ICB and say to all the partners, please take part. We'd really welcome it. We've had over 1,000 comments so far. So it's looking strong. Most of them, of course, asking for us to do a bit more of something. But that's just the way it is, isn't it? And just to pick up the comment earlier on, I think public services generally have seen a 20% increase in demand from pre-COVID levels. And what we've got to do is what are we going to prioritise and what are we going to do? And this is really about trying to pull that out. So happy to leave it to questions and comments and any feedback, or just take part in the consultation and give us the views, either officially as organisations, but also as individuals that live and work in the area.
Thank you, Graham. That's really interesting, really helpful, actually. And everybody around the table's got an opportunity to do both, haven't they? Contribute now, or do three things: contribute now, contribute as organisations, but also individuals part of the consultation. So, questions and comments, or reflections even on what you've heard. Rubbed into silence. Ash.
I just think the environment thing, although you said that in our 5 pillars, that environment and change the way people live is going to be a massive thing on that 5th pillar. So actually, it's so valuable. That is really refreshing in the way that it's the synergy between what we're trying to do and you're trying to do. So I think we've got a really good foundation to build things together.
Thank you, Graham, and we've had some conversation about it. I just want to say I really welcome the shift in the sort of values about the openness, accountability, the engagement of communities, and I think that's very helpful in terms of what we're trying to do in the ICB in engaging communities. I think there's probably some differences of emphasis where we can look at what we're trying to do within our 5 pillars and how we can align, and also within my organisation just reflect back through the consultation where we might tweak it a bit, because I think what's probably really key for all of us in managing everything is actually that activation of our communities, that real engagement of our communities, whether that's in the hospital setting or in the local authorities. And I just think we might get to a point where we can strengthen that.
Thank you. Thanks, Graham. From the point of view of Dorset Healthcare, our relationship and alignment with both local authorities is really, really important. We've been, for the BCP area, we've been doing a lot of thinking about what the models of care are that are needed to meet the needs of the community in the future. I've been spending a fair bit of time there. I was with the Rough Sleeper Service the other day, spending a day in the area, speaking to people using the services, and I was seeing some really excellent examples of co-location of teams between BCP and NHS teams, which are really important. So thank you for sharing that today, Graham. I think the division of people and communities and place and environment sounds very sensible. This is really important in terms of the big agenda around the transformation of community, physical and mental health services. And I would welcome the opportunity for Dorset to have a conversation with you and Vicky and me and David, and perhaps in that conversation we could pick up this together with the things that we were discussing earlier in the meeting today.
I just wanted to echo some of what Matthew said, but also go and say how sort of exciting and welcome it is. I think it's interesting that you've kind of gone away as a group to look at this, and you've come back with the services that we are trying to develop across the ICS as a whole, and the emphasis on how can services help communities be more resilient, thrive, rather than what can we do in the communities is really, really important. And a kind of offer of help, really, because through the place-based partnership developments, that means that what we're going to try and do, certainly through the NHS lens, is offer more support and input into those place-based partnerships to get things like you've set out there going, to working with those communities. And, you know, if you put in the right interventions or right opportunities early on, then actually people end up not using services. And that's exactly where we are in the NHS. And it's so aligned, so tightly coordinated. And we are there shoulder to shoulder with you, trying to build a sense of place around BCP. I think it's a great opportunity for us to tie that up.
Cecilia.
I mean, I welcome the whole presentation, and it's great to see, and I'm certain we'll respond to it. I think the missing piece perhaps is business, jobs, economy, which I know was the focus of the previous administration. But without economic growth, without businesses, without investment, without private sector, we will continue on a loop of funding this through, you know, public money. But I don't think we're going to get that change that we need. So again, I'm comfortable from the perspective of the ICP and businesses to get involved and work out what more we can be doing for this place. Healthy place, beautiful environments, happy places means that's places businesses want to invest. So you know, the whole thing is absolutely linked. We know that, but I'm not certain how we can help them. Thank you.
Sure. That was where my head was, Cecilia. So thank you for that. And partly because one of my colleagues circulated came from the Comped actually, what Cheshire, Wirral and the Merseyside have done around embedding social value. And I was talking to a colleague who chairs the ICS in that area yesterday, and because, you know, one of our issues is social wealth drives deprivation, and wages are so low in Dorset. I would take some learning from them actually around engaging business with a broader conversation with all of us about how are we going to get to the work that the ICP is doing and understanding what the actual living wages in parts of Dorset, and then how do we get to a place where we're all agreeing that is actually what we're paying to enable people to get out of deprivation and support social mobility. So yeah, I absolutely support that comment around business. They're absolutely good.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah, I certainly welcome what Graham said, because we've done something similar in Dorset. We did it a couple of years ago. We went out and asked the public on various members. The difficulty you've got to empower the public to understand what, if they demand this and there's only a finite amount of money, and something else has to go. And the point was made about demand, and I'm quickly talking to John before we started the meeting, and we tend to react, as local government, we react to demand. Adult social care, children's services. Sometimes we might need to challenge that demand and know if it's legitimate and completely right and proper, because some of the main services that people value are what come under the umbrella of discretionary services. They don't cost a huge amount of money, so but the pain to gain relationship between saving the money and not doing it are huge, and the impact is huge from a social perspective. And I'm a great advocate of early intervention, and a number of the things we do on in brackets a social type intervention is very much in line with that early intervention stuff. And picking up what Cecilia said about skills, economic development, and so on, I got cabinet signing off not this month, last month, my ambition around the devolution deal. A devolution gives flexibility to local authorities, and it brings huge amounts of additional funding in to help with infrastructure and a whole range of things, including health, including early intervention stuff, getting people mobile by improving bus services and so on. And I'm working, and Graham knows this, I'm working with other authorities in the immediate vicinity to see if we can pull together, because the government have now announced, they did it in July at the LGA conference, which is when I wasn't here. Gove said that he recognised that elected mayors was not suitable in every area. They're now pushing level 2, which, goodness me, it's very much in line with what we've been thinking. So I'm going to drive that really hard now with my colleague leaders. Then more will become of that later, because it's the future. We've got no we haven't got the capacity, neither BCP or Dorset or many other authorities, to do the investment that's needed without government support. And the way to do it, the conduit, is a devolution deal with those extra flexibilities.
So, just a couple of bits from me, if I may, Graham. I think it's really refreshing to hear with the new administration. And actually, I get a sense of energy from you in presenting it, so I think that's really good for BCP communities. I don't know if I missed it, or if you didn't say it, but did you actually map the 5-year forward onto the plans that you're doing? Because if you haven't, I would ask that you do that, just to see where. I think there's a lot of similarities where we could link up. But and then just the last bit before you come back on that, I was struck by something that you said, which was about having the highest ratio here in BCP area between income and house prices, and that for me really reinforces the point that Cecilia made about business, because actually if we're going to bridge that gap, somebody's got to give there.
Yeah. And also work that we're doing.
Yeah.
That last point in particular, the productivity is judged based on wages, and we have quite a low wage economy because of hospitality. So it's not that people are less productive as individuals; it's just they're in industries that don't pay very well, and that's a real challenge for us when house prices are so high in so much of the area. And I think that does apply to Dorset. It applies across the immediate surroundings, because the commutable area to BCP is that sort of economic magnet. Actually, is Dorset. It's a bit of Wiltshire, and it's the New Forest. There's not many people that come from Southampton to work, so actually the affordability of housing in that area is pretty good. Some really interesting comments. I mean, economic growth, and that's one of the things they've really wrestled with. We did originally have 3 pillars, and then we decided to get down to 2. But the challenge for me is the economic growth 2 hidden, and also tourism doesn't exactly jump out from that, does it? I like it at the top where we talk about where I need to get it into my head, don't I? I need to get where nature, coast, communities, and towns come together to create a healthy and sustainable environment. A sustainable environment includes economic growth, etc. But does it? And that's does it jump out? So I think we've got to get some words around it somewhere that reflect that. So some really helpful comments. And I'd say just feed them in as well as organisations and as individuals.
We've just got to be a bit careful about thinking that a low wage economy is only about tourism and hospitality, because it is.
There's healthcare as well.
There's not a lot of industrial competition in Dorset. So even when you go into those areas, wages are so much lower than they are everywhere else. And even when you work for agency, the wages are even lower.
So our 3 main sectors are hospitality and tourism, health and care, and culture. those are all low wage economies. That's the chance.
I'm going to respond about the 5-year forward.
Yes, I know, we'll pick that up. We looked at it, we haven't mapped it completely yet, but we will do as we come out of the consultation, so that what we produce at the end shows how it does that.
Matthew, your final word.
Very briefly, thank you, Jenny. There might be something unique we could bring into this space in terms of economic development of wages through life sciences, research, and education in health. And I suppose thinking about what our ambitions are under those headings, that'd be very helpful to put alongside this.
Great, thank you. So really interesting presentation and discussions. Moving us on, we have no items. We haven't been asked to bring any of the items for consent up into discussion, so we won't be doing that. Which then takes us on to questions from the public. And we have got two. And I think both of the people that have raised questions are in the room. Although I can't see Professor Marfleet anymore. Has he gone? Has he? Okay. So the first one then was from Professor Marfleet, which was the board will be aware, it's up on the board as well, the board will be aware of very widespread concern about provision of health services in South Dorset, notably in Portland. The Chief Medical Officer attended, which is the ICB Chief Medical Officer, attended a public meeting in Portland in February, at which strong views were expressed about inadequate services and in particular the impact of radically reduced provision at Portland Community Hospital. The island is in an area of multiple deprivation with high concentrations of family poverty and particularly low levels of social mobility. The hospital has been a key anchor institution for the most disadvantaged communities in the Dorset Council area. In its present depleted state, it is little more than a minor service site. Recent developments have intensified concern about local provision. Location of the BBC Stockholm barge in Portland Harbour, intended to hold over 500 refugees, plus a large group of staff has highlighted the improvised state of NHS services. It would be helpful for the board to note the deep frustration of Portland residents who see increased demand for health provision at the same time that the community hospital has been emptied of its key resources. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Portland, the Independent Monitoring Board at HMP, the Verne, have continued to call for provision of community hospital facilities for its 600 prisoners and over 200 staff. So the question is, will the board engage urgently with other decision makers in Dorset healthcare networks to reinstate key services? And it lists out what some of those are at Portland Community Hospital. So the response is, following the meeting with the local community earlier this year that you have referenced, we have initiated the Portland Together project, working closely with Island Community Action. This project is at the initial discovery phase, which includes conversations with residents to identify what really matters to them, which in turn will help us shape services fit for the future. To date, 33 conversations have taken place with members of the public. Further discussions will also take place with local health and care providers. Initial themes emerging from conversations include the sense of community that is present in Portland and easy access to the sea and coast. In addition, it is evident that there is a draw to living in Portland and once there, not wanting to leave. Areas of concern that have been mentioned in conversations include getting through to the GP practice to request an appointment. Once an appointment has been given, care and any follow-up required has been a positive experience for many. Another area of significant impact to those that need to use the public transport is the ability to get to Dorchester for hospital appointments. This requires 2 buses each way. Currently it's at cost of £3 return. This is based on the £8 return, sorry. This is based on, I haven't got my glasses on. This is based on the £2 per ride price cap, saving 30 to 50% on the usual cost. And so something we need to consider in how and where we deliver services moving forward. In addition to the Portland Together project, which will identify opportunities for change, the ICB is also working with local health and care providers and the voluntary sector to develop integrated neighbourhood teams, including Portland. This will evolve over the coming months and will mean that the teams will work together in a more joined up way. Clearly, we need to focus on access to the GP practice and access to urgent care in a place that is accessible and sustainable. In addition, we would like to ensure that both preventative and proactive approaches to getting help are developed. We welcome further engagement with the Portland community to help us develop this approach. We acknowledge the concern of Portland residents in relation to the Bibby Stockholm. However, the Home Office has provided additional funding, which we have used to commission a team from Bournemouth that has previous experience working with asylum seekers. This means they will not register with local practice. And then the second question that we have comes from R.B. Sylvester, who I think is still here, but I still can't see behind the pillar. And your question is, it relates to an overarching query regarding the degree to which the Dorset NHS programme, Patient First programme, is real beyond motherhood and apple pie, and it's integrated into the culture of the NHS economy in Dorset. What action will NHS Dorset take in each of the instances, and above all, in the whole service? Hopefully, Mr. Sylvester, you've heard today mention of Patient First quite a few times in the discussions that we've had today. So I hope that's gone to reassuring you that it is real. It's not just a motherhood and apple pie thing or something that's just on paper. What should also have come across is that NHS, that the Patient First is, that the Patient First relates to University Hospital Dorset, and it is not for the NHS Dorset as a whole, but you see that it's something that we've been referring to. We're also conscious that we have some other responses that you're waiting on, and those will be with you in due course. Right, so those are the two public questions. Can I check if there's any other business? I'm going to go round. In fact, I'll start with the screen. So Dean and Siobhan and Ben. Does anybody else want to know? No? Okay, and then I'll start with David. John? You, Rob?
Sorry?
Any other business?
Sorry, I was...
I've got Emma. No, I can't see you. Who's behind Kay? Anybody else? Okay, right. Dan? Oh, does she?
She just
Oh,
put her
sorry.
hand up. Sorry, just
Okay, Siobhan.
Sorry, I just thought I would say this at the end of this meeting. Can we really encourage people to have their flu and COVID vaccinations this year?
Thank you. We will. I think that's something that we often do. So, Patricia, any other business from you?
Just to say thank you to everyone, because obviously we've got to the AGM part and we're reflecting back on the last 9 months, and it's been challenging and exciting in equal measure, but the partnership is now starting to develop. It's really important, so we need to just keep going in the same direction and be really honest with each other when we've got challenges, so we can make sure we make the right decisions with our community.
And I think, just to add to that, that the strength of good partnership working is also to engage in difficult conversations. And I know we've had a couple of bits today where it hasn't been easy, but we can't shy away from that. That's what turns us into mature partnerships. So let's keep doing that and let's forge forward. So at this part, we are going to use a review of the meeting and also to pick up any key messages that we want to take out. So in terms of reviewing the meeting, how did it feel? How did it work? Is it supporting the 5-year forward strategy that we put forward, and anything else that anybody wants to contribute?
Yeah. So,
and Matthew, you want to hand up as well. So John and then Matthew.
I am somebody who naturally likes to reflect, and it does feel like it is a moment to take stock. And I think moving through, thinking about CCG through into the ICB's first year, and then dealing with many of the performance matters we've got today, or the situation that we have it, but then setting that in the context of a 5-year plan and how we integrate together. I think my reflection at the end of the session is that we are thinking across all of those time periods. And I think sometimes one of the things we reflected if we go back a year ago is we can sometimes be very short-term focused. So it hasn't felt like that today. And I think it's important that we continue to keep stretching ourselves to deliver. And then ultimately to get back to that, the impact for people who are living here in Dorset. So we get those outcomes that we talked about before. So that's my reflection on this.
I thought we started with a really, really powerful patient story, and I thought that in the discussions that we then had, issues around patient services as our population, our communities were absolutely there at the centre of our discussions throughout, and there was plenty of space for colleagues to contribute. And where challenges did take place around the table, my feeling was that they were coming from a very values-driven place of how do we get this right for our population.
Sure. My reflection was in the context of when we started talking about quality and safety being the cornerstone of everything that we do, whether just reflecting on the order of the agenda, whether we need to just think about the order in which we talk about the escalation reports and the actual delivery reports. So we're focusing a bit more on our NHS people and our communities and the quality and safety piece. And also that, we ask lots of questions about performance. We ask lots of questions about money. We hardly ever ask questions about the quality report. Now, that might be because Debbie's report is so fantastic we don't need to.
Put your hand up, yeah.
It might also be that we don't quite understand it in the detail that we should do. And if we don't, then can we just flag that? And it doesn't have to be in this public meeting, so we can do a bit more development on it. But it is a really important part of what we do. And we need to think about the performance report and the welfare of our people and the finance report through the quality lens. And we need you to hold us, our feet to the fire, keep asking, well, actually, if we are broke, what does that mean for the quality of service that we're offering and the safety service we're offering? If we're asking our people to do more because we've got vacancies and we're short of money, what does that mean for their welfare? Because at the end of the day, we're a people business, and if we're not focused on that, then we won't be able to deliver the ambition at all.
So Debbie, I'm going to bring you in next, yeah, but then I'll go Dan, and then Emma, and then John.
Yeah, my comment, my reflection was going to be sort of very similar to Tricia's really. I just wanted to just ask the board that question around I'm more than happy to take whatever comments and questions come my way from the quality report. Now, I was reflecting on it, and I was thinking that does that just mean that our quality report actually is written now succinctly and well, and actually people get what they need from the quality report? But it was just to pose that question. Also, we do have a very detailed discussion on it at Quality and Safety Committee, which so then I was reflecting that actually as that subcommittee of the board, are people content that actually the detailed discussion is happening at that subcommittee? But I think it's a good point, Patricia, because sometimes when you present such a key report, there's no questions, you think, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's something we need to think about, because I think the Leppy case raises some real issues for boards around how do they assess what's happening with quality. And it's something we were reflecting in our med session earlier, but I think it's something we really do need to think about it. Dan.
Mine's built on John's point, because it's been really good that we've grappled a bit more with perform, comply, and transform. You've seen that through estates, and you've seen it through all the conversations. The positive states felt like there's been more thought, conversation, reference to local government and other partners outside of the NHS. And I guess that's a sign of our maturity. But it's really good that we're thinking about these things as a system, even though we're the ICB board with those compliance requirements. John talks about timeframes. Mine's more about inclusion.
So I guess my reflections are from when I read the papers and have kind of heard the conversations play out as well today. And when I was reading the papers, it was always that balance around the complexity of the issues, the strategic kind of wicked issues everybody's grappling with, and then some of the small aggregated things that will make the impact. So I think it was you, Matthew, that talked about people first. And when I read Patricia's report, what really struck me in that was the pennies from heaven stuff.
So there's some really simple initiatives that's included and some narrative in the papers that we don't talk about in the debate, because obviously the debate is often up here, isn't it? How can we solve some of these wicked issues? So I guess it kind of links back to maybe some of the key messages that come out of here around that simple, small stuff that we can all do, no matter how complex things are, how difficult things are, or how much complexity is, makes a real difference to us as employees, the people in our community. So I guess it's just more about that complexity, simplicity, and let's not lose sight of the simplicity and simple stuff as well.
We'll get onto the messages next, so hopefully. John.
Yeah, just a small observation, really, in the light of what John was saying, taking stock, talking about people, and I think that this board, in my experience, is just a very positive place to be as a group of people and getting to know one another and to pick up, as you say, those kind of accidental, sometimes quick wins and so on. I think it's proving to be very effective at doing that, but mostly because of the quality of the relationships and the growing trust that we have. So I just wanted to reflect and kind of appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, so Jonathan, sorry.
Very quick, I agree with everything everyone said. I'd say the only thing where we haven't quite imprinted ourselves on that, those 5 pillars or the 5 objectives, and I think that they're not, like Graham trying to remember his vision statement. It's not quite there in all the consciousness.
Yeah,
but I mean, we're getting there. But
yeah, and that's probably one of the key takeouts, I think, for us really from today, isn't it? About how do we get into that rhythm, which is the point I think you made right at the beginning around the 5 pillars. Key messages. I'm going to go to Liz. Have you been keeping a track of key messages?
Yes, I think I have. So the key concept I pulled out around the power of the patient story, and the links there with the work that's already underway, especially in relation to children and young people, but certainly it is broader than that. The around industrial action and our concerns around the potential impact on performance, finances and safety. The impact of the Letley case on particularly on public confidence and our staff. And I think we also probably to express our joint sympathy for the families. I think we touched on the challenges around the financial challenges and performance challenges. I thought there was commitment to a system-wide infrastructure strategy. And also I thought the board really welcomed the vision and priorities that were expressed in the DCP consultation.
And then the only other 2 I've got then it was the thanks to I was going to call his name, but thanks to the GP rather than because I guess it's not just him at the end of the day, is it? So thanks to that practice, and I've just lost the other one. What's the other one that we discussed at the same time?
The 2 actions around the vital
They were
actions, which were
I think I'll put it on here.
Entrance course, medical and food, and then the hotels and what we're doing around the place.
And also caught about the patient story as well.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we're 7 minutes.
Can I just thank people for coming along as well? And also, I know that sometimes questions from the public are not always the easiest thing for boards to receive. But actually, I think sometimes they're quite helpful because it just, we can get sometimes a little bit lost in our lens as opposed to the public's lens. So I think it's good that we've had some people here as well. So thanks.
Thank you. So I was going to say, we've come to the end of the meeting in public. So at this point, we are going to ask the public to leave us, but thank you for coming. And I also agree around the questions. It's really useful to have that engagement, to hear what people are thinking and to give us the opportunity to respond to that. So thank you very much. And then for the rest of the board, would you be happy to